Live. Oh, how could I forget that? That is real stupid. All right, we're live. If you're watching this not live, there'll be little markers down below which tells you when I actually start the video. As always, I hang out for like 10 minutes before I actually start watching stuff because people cycle in. I don't see other YouTubers do this, so there's probably a better way to do it, but that's the way I do it. So look below, click those markers. Until then, I'm just going to let people come in. And let me know if you're here, if you want to comment, or don't. I'm not your dad. Watch this and work backwards. Good evening, by the way. That's a good introduction to Whatifalthist because he is a YouTuber. He's a young guy. He's like 22, 23, I think. And he talks a lot about anthropology stuff, which makes him pretty relevant to me. And he got popular when he was like 18, right? So it's like he was pretty young, and he has some takes that are generally considered pretty out there. So there's a lot to go off of because he talks a lot about a lot of great topics. He has a lot of good things that I agree with, and he also has some things that I think are honestly pretty ridiculous. So both are fun. And there's some other context. He had what I was originally going to do was he posted this like 12-hour literally. Oh, how's my audio, by the way? Let me know if my audio's okay. Oh, what's up, Vingle? Yeah, we just went live. Again, if you're watching this not live, I start the video 8-10 minutes in usually. What's up, Blue? How you doing? Good to see you. Yeah, so it's he posted a 12-hour long 3-part thing which I hadn't started watching. I was going to do a live stream on it. But then he privated it. He took it down. And apparently what happened, and I guess while we wait, we can go over this a little bit. Apparently what happened is like, it was some sort of social experiment and he had said some crazy stuff in there. I'm looking at his Twitter right now and I don't see. Oh, here we go. So it was a whole 12-hour long like biography thing. I was trying to make something go as viral as possible for advertising reasons, so I said something as ridiculous over the top as possible as a way to harvest views for my video series and the group. I was playing some word games and narrativization where I'm technically not saying anything exactly wrong in that you can point yourself to serve the tree of life, which means you can I don't know what I just read. I made a whole multi-hour segment at the end of the video, which was as ridiculous as possible to freak people out on purpose. I talked to a beaver puppet, make jokes about pleasuring myself, and talk about the philosophy of magic in it. The point was to show to not take yourself seriously. I mean, whatever, man. Instead, this just became a vessel of my own egomania. I skipped a whole paragraph. I say psychic as a person capable of dealing with the realm of forms. So psychic is one form of intelligence among others that deal with empathic abilities. Thank you for letting me know the audio is great. It wasn't a stream. It was I might have said stream, a 12-hour long video series. Like there were 3 videos for 12 hours total. He took them down. I'm sure I could find them somewhere, but if he wants them privated, I'm not going to do a reaction to them because that would be disrespectful. So I'm not going to do that. Wish he didn't take them down, but he doesn't want them up. I get it. Like I don't dislike this guy. I've been very critical of him, but I don't dislike him. It's just that his content is very much like in my realm to talk about it. I know a lot of people know me from the Flint Dibble thing, but generally that's not really the type of content that I really want to be doing. It was just, what Flint did was so bad that it was like it made it like obligatory, not obligatory, but like it made it acceptable. I still don't want to spend my time on negative stuff like that, and most of my content isn't, but I don't want to get too much into that type of thing. I did recently have a beautiful experience with God that inspired me to go back into politics. If you have a beautiful experience with God that makes you want to get into politics, you might have been talking to the devil. I'm not sure about that one. Yeah, I mean, whatever, man. He tried something and it didn't work out. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Yeah, let me see if I can go down. He probably took down the original post he made. I won't spend too long going for it. Christ was an Oriental mystic and magician. We forget this. What? I guess Oriental just means, or Oriental, the word Oriental literally means Eastern. And Christ is from the Near East. And by certain definitions, yeah, he'd be a mystic and a magician. I guess that's technically correct. You probably shouldn't say it. Um, After we were formally, he meant formerly. Yeah, I guess he deleted that post he made. That's all right. Oops, not Jesse Wells. This is the video I'm gonna share. I'm gonna start the video in a few minutes. I just let people cycle in. Probably start whenever. These live streams, the ones on Whatifalthist, tend to do pretty good. I'm looking for other stuff to live stream on. You know, it's good in between episodes. I'm tomorrow I'm gonna get out episode 73, I think. It's with a Central European history professor who's originally Austrian but lives in Norway now at the University of Bergen. And he's it was a great conversation. A little slow, you know, but you know, it's like a 3 hour podcast. Of course, it's going to be slow. Yeah, I should probably set up Rumble. Their UI, I have a Rumble. It's just the UI isn't as good as YouTube. So I don't always want to go into it. Adam makes me do it on 5 till midnight, if you don't know, which is my other podcast we do on Mondays. It's more politics. I do it with like four other guys who are from the libertarian like podcasting sphere. Probably my best friends in content creation. I would say great guys, but you know they're idiots. We all are. I kind of also play a character there. It's definitely not as serious as this. I'm very much screwing around on it. It's kind of like because everything else I do is so serious that like 5 till midnight's kind of like my outlet to not take myself so seriously. Yeah, 5 till midnight. The last one was a lot of fun. It was. They're more fun to watch live, but obviously you can watch the streams on there if you go to it. You know, that's what I'll do. We had a couple minutes until I start the video. I usually start about 10 minutes in. 5 till might. That's not it, but it actually did bring up 5 till midnight. Yeah. Yeah, this is 5 till midnight. Many fewer subscribers, though most people listen to it on audio. Yeah, this is us.
Oh, you're like,
What kind of
I made
fucking
this
bullshit
intro.
is- like,
Dude, he does this every
he-
week.
The bad
I love it.
news
It's
is
kinda
that
stupid.
civilization is crumbling around you.
Wear a dog mask, cut your dick off, bomb Palestine.
The good news is that you are not alone.
There's butthole shaving videos.
Feel bad for the minorities in LA for having to deal with the white people in LA.
You have 5 till midnight, live every Monday at 8 p.m. where you join 5 limbiskit Americans to laugh at the absurd nonsense of the end of history.
Sam,
stop it!
Sar.
Yeah, so that's 5 till midnight. If you're interested in that, go give us a follow over there, or don't. I'm not your dad, but I'd appreciate it. It's not entirely like this, but it's fun. Yeah, and lots of racial slurs. Not against like, I love to say like against white racial slurs like WAP, Dagos, Mick, stuff like that. Not like real ones. Unless we have a guest that isn't white, like we had on. I mean, I get he's like white Hispanic, but Hispanic still. Gosh, what's his name? Really prominent guy in like the almost into the far right. Pete Quinones. Yeah, Pete Quinones, whose show I've been on as well. We had on Pete Quinones, and he said the the word for Mexicans that starts with a B, or not, I guess Hispanics. I think it's mostly Mexicans, but that starts with a B, which I will not say personally. But I was like, yeah, you can say that one. I'll say WAP and Mick, and we can all say the slurs that go towards our own ethnicities, and that's fun. But yeah, let's get started with the Whatifalthist. What's up, D503? Yes, Vingle, that's the one. That's most of the word. Yeah, that he said, not me. Yeah, thank you, Swamp Fox. Appreciate it. All right. Been there, done that. I love Hispanics. If you follow me on Twitter, you know every once in a while I post a picture of me with my Cafe Bustelo coffee from Cuba, which I guess was bought out by Smucker's Corporation, which sucks. But I do that. I love it. I love my Cafe Bustelo coffee, and I say I love Hispanics, like Trump did with the thing, he did it with a taco bowl. All right, let me just nope. Let me start when the video starts, by the way. I'm just going to put the timestamp in. When the video starts, please tell me if my audio leveling is okay. It should be correct because it should be the same as it was before, but just let me know if like the audio of the video is off with my own audio. What am I doing? Okay, timestamp 11:30. Cool. All right, let's go. Is bureaucracy killing civilization?
I say this since I've read most of the authors in the science of history. What I've consistently found is that most of said authors were writing around the World War era. Authors like Oswald Spengler, Amaury de Riencourt, Carroll Quigley, Konechki, William McNeill, Arnold Toynbee, amongst others.
Video,
I don't think we as a society understand how intelligent these people were. On top of this, when you read older books, it's immediately obvious that our society has lost intellectual advancement. We're so addicted to the idea of progress that we can't stomach the idea that we're less intelligent than our ancestors. These thinkers are operating on a level of analysis which you would never see today. For example,
I like that he included this. The linear progressive model of history, Eurocentric. So most anthropologists, they don't go with this anymore. They don't really put a lot of credence in this because like civilization advancing is not something that's linear. It's multifaceted. It can go in any sort of directions. It's not like a linear view of history is kind of like a oh, you know what I should be doing? If I start monologuing, I should be putting my face full screen. I look like crap right now in this video. I don't know what's wrong with my face, but whatever. I'm not a woman, so I'm not going to be concerned about this. In a linear view of history, it's almost like a civilization game, right? It's like you get writing and you get the wheel and you get capitalism. Like it's on this track where you get one thing, then you get the next thing. But that's not really true for how civilizations advance because it has a lot more to do with your geography, individual choices that are made by the culture, cultural differences. Yes, I do identify as a male. My pronouns are he, him. So when an example I like to give for this is that, right, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Incas in the New World, they didn't use the wheel. So it's like, oh, they weren't that advanced. They didn't use the wheel, but like they are obviously advanced. They have these super dense cities. But what they don't have is large pack animals that make using the wheel a thing that would benefit them in a great way. And if you don't have large pack animals to make use of the wheel, then you don't have a use for the wheel. And additionally, we know that they knew about the wheel because they have the wheel in toys, but they don't export it into carts and things like that. Because they don't have large pack animals. The Incas, they did have llamas. Maybe they could have used wheels for those, but the Incas have a geography that is very, very like up and down. It's in the mountains. You can't really use like carts for that. They'll break. You use skids instead. Yeah, thanks, Blue. You're making it worse. Are we getting into Göbekli Tepe, the Sphinx? Likely not. I know a lot of people know me from the Flint Dibble stuff, the archaeology, but most of my stuff is cultural anthropology. I love cultures. We get into archaeology sometimes, and I do know some of it. Yeah, so I've talked about Guns, Germs, and Steel on the Good Old Boys podcast before and defended it a little bit. It has issues. I don't know if what I was just saying was exactly like Guns, Germs, and Steel. I think the argument there is a little bit different, and I won't get into it just because it's so long, and I've talked about it a lot before. Um, it's just, civilizations can do different things in a linear view of history. It isn't real in the sense that it's not how it works in practicality. You can view history that way if you want to. I mean, all these views are valid in the sense of learning how people think about things, the different ways of looking at them. Like, I don't adhere to an idea that I need to think about things in one certain way, and that's mutually exclusive with a different model. I would say that all of these different, ideas about history from the past, from today, they all tell us something. They all have some level of validity to them. Some of them more harmful than others. Won't get into like the specifics of that right now, but it's a thing. But yeah, let's keep going. All that just based off of seeing one graph that he barely talked about.
Well, Spengler looked at how society's concepts of nature, math, and time can predict its civilizational point in its life cycle, and also
like
what the
Thrawn from
destiny
Star
of said
Wars.
civilization is. These authors ended up getting a lot right. Spengler, Ralph Linton, Amaury Durignancourt, and Carroll Quigley all predicted, writing about a century ago, that the story of the 21st century would be atheism, Caesarism, social alienation, and population collapse.
Materialism
Quigley
is bad.
predicted the fall of the Soviet Union, and Amaury the stagnation of the sciences. With all that being said, these authors all end up sharing
take
a
them at
few
face
different
value.
points. For one, they all agree that the collapse in religion was a civilization-destroying calamity. Although all authors agree on this point, Carroll Quigley, writing around 1960, especially said that the West's lack of a strong religion, if not solved immediately, would turn into a cancer that would consume every single part of Western civilization. He titled his history of the 20th century Tragedy and Hope, given he hoped the tragedy of the world's wars would provoke self-inspection in Western civilization to create the hope of a new religious breakthrough that could save the West in the 21st century. We've since seen, with the rise of a suicidal anti-church to total dominance in the West, that he was correct. The one thing that all these authors agreed on, something which they all made the greatest effort to convey as basically their most important point, is that something unexpected would be the greatest threat to Western civilization. All these authors
What do you
writing
think
around
the
the
greatest
World
threat to
War
Western
era
civilization
agreed
is?
that the rise of the bureaucracy was the most dangerous thing to Western civilization, that if left untrammeled, that it would destroy everything that made the West and global civilization great, molding us into a broken tyranny, turning us into everything we hated. Why did they think that? And more horrifyingly, why has it already happened?
Yeah. I mean, bureaucracy is bad. It takes free market into almost a pseudo control economy. It's just
A huge reason we're
like it.
facing this crisis is due to the feminization of society, which has reached into every single aspect of
I'm
life.
with you so far.
The masculine is what pushes against bureaucratization, and without the masculine, bureaucracy takes over everything. It's why I'm always looking for ways to revitalize masculinity. However, there is hope, and Black Forest is a good place to start. Black Forest's NMN supplements have been dubbed the feminization killer. NMN is nicotinamide mononucleotide, a derivative of the B vitamin niacin, which works by replenishing diminished NAD plus levels, which naturally fall at
Why
a
is he
rate
just
of around
reading off
1%
the
a year.
I don't understand what's going on.
NMN is known to dramatically improve
this an
health and
ad?
longevity by serving as a precursor. They sponsor the so silenced or subdued.
Okay.
Times like this,
This is what he's advertising. I'm
silenced or
reacting to his
subdued.
thing. So
We're in this together.
blackforestsupplements.com/what.
And together we'll rise above.
Okay. Also, Axios Fitness. Link is down below. I highly recommend it. Get your health, specific. It gives you a plan, really worked out well for me based on your fitness goals. I have a lot of chronic injuries. So JD Sturker from Axios Fitness really helped me out with that. He's the only sponsor of the show. Link is down below. Also, the Patreon is $2 a month. Thank you for telling me that. $2 a month on the Patreon. Back to the video. Let me know how the audio is now.
Part 1, Class Analysis. I think we exist in a beautiful moment for dissidents now, given the establishment has failed on almost every level of what a functioning society should expect.
Okay.
This means that for enterprising folks watching, you can choose to provide a service and make good money doing so. Academia has become ideological propaganda, so start writing yourself. The traditional movie industry has failed, so start making your own movies. This is a great point to start with since it illustrates multiple points I'm trying to convey. One of the things I would like to co-opt from the left is class analysis. This is since the left basically invented class analysis and then used it as a vector to win. A huge reason the left dominates society today is that they were able to use 3 different intellectual tricks to manipulate the populace without them even knowing. The left had an intellectual breakthrough in the century from 1850 to 1950, which gave them incredible power. Those 3 thinkers, or at least the ones I can think of now, in that I'm probably missing some more, are Marx, Hegel, and Freud. Read this text wall if you're interested. Marx was able to study class analysis and thus was able to differentiate the population into different sub-interest groups with innate different self-interests. What the left was able to do was to ally itself with certain groups, in our era, women and ethnic or sexual minorities. From this, they were able to pander to their self-interests in order to divide society to win. Is why their platform is their controlled version of diversity, since they've shoved those groups into their coalition, and thus by putting...
Okay, so I mean, this is something I actually talked about in the article I wrote for the Dissident Review Volume 4 or Volume 5 propaganda. It's the different, like, my audio. Okay, how is it now? Is this loud enough? My audio is my audio, like no, different groups. When you have different groups who at a national or a state level, you have large sample sizes of these groups. So if you have any group, we'll say gay white men, right? Like gay white men with these demographic studies they have, whether individual gay, like we have some gay white men in the comments right now, actually, who are not voting Democrat, I assume, but you can assume based on gay white men or whatever group that they'll vote for, that will vote for a certain person, or a certain political party at a certain rate. So a certain amount of them are going to vote for this person. And they're not always correct, but they're always like in the ballpark. And over time, they're correct on certain trends. So, courting specific groups, it's kind of like a form of rent seeking. It's not good. It's appealing to a specific segment of the population, which for a nation that, the people should be united, it's harmful to the society. I don't want to get into it too much. I always am digressing. Sam always picks on me. Yeah, of course I do. Hey, I'm just giving you representation for the gay white men in the audience. Isn't that what gay people want? At least on a large scale thing. Obviously, I'm kidding. What's the WTF here? I'm not talking about you, Grasshopper.
Those groups in positions of power for diversity, they can hold on to power very effectively.
I see. And he's talking about the groups that are in he's talking about the groups as they act, not just for voting, but for them being in positions of power. Because just like you can assume that at least on a macro level, a certain level of any specific group will think and act in a certain way and vote in a certain way, you can do that for people in positions of power as well. Sorry, I've been having trouble getting distracted by the chat. I need to when I'm talking to not look at the chat because I'm not used to having as many commenters as I do now. So I'll get better at it over time. American politics boil down to college educated versus non-college educated. Right. So, people that are college educated they'll think, and obviously I'm college educated, but I'm not, I don't fit in with all the things that are associated with being college educated. But education is by definition an indoctrination into a certain idea. When you're being educated on something, you're being educated towards a certain belief system. And like in North Korea, that people are educated, they're going to think something entirely different than somebody who's college educated in the US. Social morality, defund the police, foreign policy. Yeah. And people that are college educated tend to be more liberal, more left wing. Let's keep going.
As we'll see in this video, if anyone studied class oppression today, they would see that the left is doing class oppression to a horrifying level. Almost everything the left does today is an attempt by the bureaucracy to gain complete authority over society. Anyone who would study class analysis to the slightest degree would end up finding this. Even left-wing authors like David Graeber. I would like the right to co-opt class analysis for our own benefit.
David Graeber is the guy who wrote The Dawn of Everything. And yeah, he's the leftist writer, but I love to read all sorts of different stuff. David Graeber is one of my favorites. The one that Dawn of Everything isn't, like, I guess it's somewhat culturally left-wing perspective, but Bullshit Jobs is more like a direct attack on capitalism, but there's value in it.
I would like the right to take every single leftist technique, except those that would make us lose our souls, in order to make ourselves better and sharper. For years, I've wanted to make a video studying how different social classes affect the societies they're in. I haven't passed the threshold of intuitive comprehension where I feel comfortable in my own ability to write that video yet, though. However, the best way to explain it is that there are a series of social classes that different societies in history can choose to lead them. Said dominant social class will rework every single element of society in its favor, including its social structure, ruling ideology or religion, economics, social cues, literature, and anything else you could think of. In effect, it permeates the society on such a profound level as to become inextricably linked into its social fabric. Aristotle was able to make a really accurate model of political philosophy nearly 2,500 years ago, which you can read more about in this text wall, since due to the structure of human society, there are only so many ways you can.
I know he's just like showing Aristotle's thing, but rule by one, like it's fake. It's not true. There's always patronage systems in monarchy. The monarch is never truly absolute, even in the age of absolutism, as you might say. But patronage, shout out good old boys.
Orient a society in game theory terms. For Aristotle, it was either monarchy or rule by one man, oligarchy or rule by a cabal of men, and democracy or all men.
About women?
A society
Women
can be governed by the priest class, the warrior nobility, the merchants, and worst of all, the secret police, just to say a few of the social classes that I've consistently seen lead societies. Each of these is archetypal in that by choosing a certain ruling class, the society takes in traits with similarities to other often very different societies with the same ruling class. Gaetano Mosca talks a lot about this for those who are interested. A warrior society will have honor as its most important value, will often solve legal disputes through right of combat, or will rule through divine right and have a family-based leadership. A merchant-led society will naturally gravitate towards a parliamentary democracy with strong property rights in a colonial empire. A society run by the secret police will almost always be atheist or agnostic, since religion acts as a brake on the totalitarian extractive power of the secret police, and instead will possibly have a utopian ideology which warrants limitless growth in order to bring about limitless good, which is the only thing that can justify said totalitarianism. Oftentimes, elites are shared on a civilizational basis. China has for thousands of years been run by the bureaucracy, a parallel which we'll study later in this video since it alludes to the current West. West. Meanwhile, Egypt and India have been run by the priest class. An interesting example for how a society can be molded by a certain ruling class is that when the Portuguese arrived in South India in the early 16th century, there were low caste kings who weren't allowed to make eye contact with high caste Brahmins who were the subjects of their own country because the priest class had gained such a social predominance.
I just found out that I can set a goal for donations. That's neat. I don't care if you guys donate. You know, if you don't have extra money or you don't want to, it's totally fine. All I really ask is that you you like and subscribe and hang out and comment on the video, not only in the live chat but on the video itself. I appreciate that. But I did put that up for 5 things. I don't know what people want. I guess if people have ideas for what I should do for goals for super chats, but I'm bad at this type of stuff. But yeah, also like the video, Patreon's down below, $2 a month, and also Axios Fitness, which I highly, highly recommend. It's really, really helped me a lot. It's nice to have a community of guys and a plan for working out and something to keep you honest with doing it. But yeah, let's keep going.
Inside India that they weren't subservient even to their own rulers. Greece and India were run by warrior slave nobilities. You often see ruling coalitions with probably the most normal coalition being between a warrior nobility and a church, as seen in most third world societies or in the Islamic world. The West was the most successful society in history since it had a balance of powers between different ruling classes, whether the nobility, monarchy, merchants, church, or other interests. Secondly, of all the things that made the West great, the most important in my opinion was competition. The Western tradition is predicated upon an objective aim to reach, namely God or the truth, and there's competition for who can best provide that service. This is how science, capitalism, democracy, the Western military system, and Catholicism, or even more so, Protestantism works, in that you establish a structure for domesticated competition in which the best result wins. The West was able to dominate the world in almost every field, whether science, intellectual, health, industry, religion, or war, since the West is comfortable with enough chaos that it's willing to enter into the undiscovered or uncertain to return with goods and glory. Basically, every other society views chaos as a pure evil and is obsessed with order. This is why Asian societies venerate tradition, the government, and patriarchal authority so much. It's also why these societies fossilized, and once the Europeans arrived with rifles and steamships, they were unable to adapt.
This is actually something I've talked about before. I totally agree. It's like in China, they were leading up to what is called the Century of Humiliation in China. They were very, very against bringing in any sort of foreign outside ideas. And so they didn't want to trade with the English. They had one area, I forget where it was, I think Canton, where European traders were allowed to come to live in, and they were allowed to live there, but they could never leave. And they had to adopt Chinese dress, and they only traded certain items. And that's like very restrictive. There's a video on the channel where I talked about this letter that was sent from the Emperor of China to the King of England when a representative came. And it's they didn't want any disruption. You know, they were called the Middle Kingdom, the Heavenly Kingdom, things like this. Like they just wanted to keep doing what they were doing. And this is like that yin yang idea almost of like this balance and perpetuity. And this is not like something I've also talked about on the channel a lot is how new technologies disrupt culture. And so they didn't want this. They actively didn't want this. And a lot of cultures are like this. And European culture was like that before early modernity or into early modernity when they started adopting more of these things. And, you know, maybe for good reason when you look at our culture today.
adapt. A healthy society is like water in that it can flow around and adapt to any situation it faces. An example of this working really well, and in my opinion, the greatest reason America and Rome became the most successful societies in history, was that their founders established a division of powers, which in turn established the seamless transfers from old corrupt elites to new, more vigorous ones. In America, we've seen the change of the dominant elites going from East Coast merchants to Southern plantation owners to Northern industrialists to coastal managerial class, and now we're forming a new elite around the Gulf of Mexico based off the internet. In Rome, the elite changed from the Etruscan kings to the Roman nobility to the populist bosses, the Roman emperor, the Balkan warlords, then Germanic barbarians, or the Eastern Roman Empire. In each case, a successful society is capable of changing out elites once they become morally corrupt, as all elites naturally do over time as a biological principle. When a civilization goes into decline, it's almost always predominantly driven by a single elite taking over power. This elite then centralizes power and then shuts down progress or growth, since any change would threaten their power. This is why capitalism is so rare over history, since the elite forms an alliance with the mob to tear down the vigorous...
No, capitalism is rare over history because in capitalism, there's not like... Capitalism relies on a larger rate of economic growth. Like if you go back to the Middle Ages or any other time in history before like the 1600s, 1700s, the rate of like internal growth of a place is like, in economic terms, if you view it from a modern lens of capitalism, it's like 2 or 3%. Places are not considered to like... Capitalism at its base is you invest money into things to create new things to make more money. That's the capital in capitalism. But you can't do that in a place where this level of economic growth of like in capitalism, the stock market, it's like 7% per year. You can't like, and that's compounded, right? If you have a system where things are growing 3% at a time or 3% per year, it takes decades for actual real growth to happen, because it's not like half the growth of 7%, like 3% if you're lucky. It's more like 1 or 2%. It's more like you have to think about it on a compounding timescale, because at 7%, the economic any amount of money, any amount of capital at 7%, it doubles every 10 years. At 3%, it doubles like every 40, 50 years. So that's why this was a patronage system where the people that held power gave power in feudal systems to people below them, or a bureaucratic system in China where the people who are getting the power are people that are passing exams and getting into the bureaucracy, becoming officials, rather than people being able to just start a business and create economic output through work. So no, that's why capitalism. It's not whatever he said, and I forgot what he said at this point, but whatever.
And successful, since they excite the mob's envy and are a threat to the ruling class. When you study when societies go into decline, you find that it's often a point that's difficult to directly disentangle, and it's an incredibly anticlimactic process. If you want to look at Spain's decline, you would find that there's no single year where Spain stopped being a great power. And this is true of all countries like this, whether Britain or the Muslim world or China, where there is this anticlimactic moment where they shut themselves off to basically the divine creativity that allowed them to form great states, and they become purely mechanical through trying to maintain their current power, which destroys their old
China has been around for like 3,000 years in its current form. Like things have changed over time, but it's like the same ethnic group, the same cosmology. Like it's very, very similar stuff. It's the most resilient culture on Earth. Like there's no, the system does change over time, but it's the same basic idea. And you don't see that for Rome or the Mayans or the Aztecs. It doesn't work like that. That's just not, it's just not true for China.
Creativity. And then in the process of this event that no one noticed happened, these societies lose everything which made them great in the beginning. The ancient Greeks and Romans had advanced machinery and the steam engine, but they never industrialized given slave labor was so cheap. There was no push for productivity. Using machinery was seen as ungentlemanly. In effect, a slave-owning ruling class avoided any breakthroughs that could weaken their control over human muscle power. China in the 11th century started an industrial revolution with the largest blast furnaces ever seen until 19th century industrial Britain. In the 15th century, China sailed as far as Kenya and possibly America. In the first case, the ruling bureaucracy...
Yeah, man, I don't know what was going on with him when he posted that. I hope he's okay. I've always said that I think he's going to be okay long term. Like he'll grow out of this, and he's clearly very smart. Thank you for the donation, by the way, D503. I appreciate it, brother. Listening to him is entertaining and intriguing, but yeah, I have no idea.
Created so many regulations that the factories weren't profitable. And in the second case, the bureaucracy burned the treasure fleets after the Yongle emperor died.
Oh yeah, I've talked about
Islam
this too.
1,000 years ago was the wealthiest, most technologically and philosophically advanced.
But look, that itself is an argument against him, against what he's saying, because like he's saying they stopped what made them great, but the treasure fleets were in the 1400s. China was already a thing for what, like 2,000 years, 1,500 years, depending on how you calculate it. And like it had gone through many changes in that time. So it's not like the treasure fleets were what made China great and big and rich. The treasure fleets bankrupted China. It didn't help them to do that. So it doesn't help his hypothesis that like, that that a nation will atrophy over time is the word. It's not the word he used, but it's the word I would use. There's some validity to it, but it doesn't apply in every case. And it certainly doesn't apply to China. And in this case, the treasure fleets were a thing when they were at their height. They stopped being a thing because they bankrupted them. It didn't help them. So they burned the treasure fleets and under new leadership.
Capitalist, humane, feminist, and politically strongest society in the world. However, from that point, the nobility and church teamed up to keep down the merchant classes, peasants, and science. The Middle East went through an active process of social decay and decommercialization. Even before European colonialism, the Middle East regulated itself into obscurity. For just an example, at the time of the Crusades, the Levant was one of the wealthiest places in the world, then descending into complete depopulation by the time the British conquered the region in the early 20th century. Egypt in the 19th century had less than half the people it did in the 12th. All of the authors I mentioned above knew about this historic precedent. This is why they were so terrified about the rise of the bureaucracy. They knew this principle, and before their own very eyes, they saw the rise of the exact sort of social elite which had killed every previous civilization. Now, why did the West go from the society which had done the best job ever at avoiding this to doing it to itself? Part 2. The story of Britain. In 1914, Britain had the largest empire ever seen in global history even today. The insane thing is that the largest empire in history made up less than 5% of Britain's total GDP. The British Empire also made up less than 15% of Britain's foreign trade. This means that Britain conquered the world without ever having to even take up a fraction of their financial efforts. Pre-industrial taxes, with some exceptions, were so low as to barely register today. Britain was the country in Europe with the highest tax rates, and to survive the horrible Napoleonic Wars, they raised their top income tax for the highest income brackets to 10%. Top's tax rate in Britain today is 50% in peacetime. Every single incredible building you see in Washington, D.C.
Also, I should say that taxes in general, as a concept, they don't come from citizens paying into a system. They come from money or labor, or it's usually not money because it's usually coming from the output of a specific region. Up until quite recently, there are exceptions to that, but any amount of labor or of dollars or of some specific good that's produced by a region, the taxes, they come from being conquered, and it's a ritualization of plunder, right? So like if a nation or a group of people conquers someone else, they would plunder. They would just, kill and pillage and take things from people. But when you conquer people, you can also just ritualize that plunder in taking a certain percentage of their output, whatever that output is. And that's where taxes come from. They come from a conquered people. I think the first example we have in written records is from Egypt, but it's not citizens paying into a nation. It's the opposite. It's people conquered by a nation or a group of people that then pay ritualized plunder. And that's what taxes are.
As well as the conquest of modern America from the natives, was done by a society without an income tax. Let's zoom ahead to 1945, or within a single generation of this. The government jumped from making up 5% of Britain's economy to something like 2/3. Today, governments in the Western world make up between half to 2/3 of the economy in peacetime. Top income tax in Britain was 95% and 90% in America. In very short time, the government went from a relatively weak force in Britain and the rest of the Western world to a complete dominating sun. The governments that came out of the world wars, especially even more so behind the Iron Curtain, were the most powerful and intrusive upon personal life known in human history. A theme which we'll tease out in this video is that both sides of the Iron Curtain had much more in common than we'd like to give them credit for. They were both sides of the same coin, being atheist, bureaucratic, leftist technocracies. It's clear that at some point in this process, there was a major shift between different ruling classes. This is the sort of thing that's normal historically, in that the Black Death saw European civilization gradually transfer from a socio-economic system based off feudal nobility to a merchant-based capitalism. Alternately, the Persian conquest of the Near East in the 6th century BC was a warrior nomad elite conquering native regimes like the Babylonians and Egyptians, who were ruled by theocratic priest classes. Britain is an easy example of this. Britain before World War I was a hybrid regime between a warrior nobility, which through a parliamentary system based off income, where they worked with the industrial merchant class, who gradually gained more power as time went on. For a brief side note, an alliance of the nobility and merchants is one of the best combinations a society can have if done well, with some of the most successful societies in history having this combination for reasons I can explain in this text wall. When we look at Britain in 1914, as said before, with their global spanning empire that made up less than 5% of Britain's total GDP, Britain was dependent off a gold standard. They saw inflation as a moral evil. In British law, the government was not allowed to interfere in private family life. Britain did not have conscription until the final year of World War I, relying off high social trust pushing recruitment, since they saw a draft as state overreach. The negative side of all of this was the British government was so low government that they didn't intervene in trying to improve the horrible famines in Ireland, which lowered the island's population by 2/3 in the middle of the 19th century, as well as in India, which saw 30 million deaths over the British colonial period, making the famines in British India one of the bloodiest atrocities to ever happen. This is clearly a society which, as I explain in this video, was run by a property-owning merchant class in which the merchants support property rights and parliamentary democracy, which allows the stability for which commerce is necessary. This is also the most effective system in history for economic and social improvement, as I can explain in this text wall. As James Burnham liked to say in his book, which partly inspired this video, or The Managerial Revolution, World War I was the last war of the capitalist order, and World War II the first of the managerial world. For a look at Britain at the end of World War II, it was a country with a 95% tax rate, in which most industries, including even remarkably steel, were nationalized. The British Empire was peacefully decolonized, and as the managers took greater power, even things as ridiculous as what flowers you planted in your garden were regulated by the state. I really can't emphasize how much power the managerial class has and how much it can needle into every single aspect of life. As a petty personal example of this, I used to live in a town that didn't even have an HOA HOA, but the local town would literally fine me if I left my trash can at the curb on any day except the day they picked up the trash. I tested this
That's
thesis
insane.
where I would travel for an extra
I
day
hate
and
it.
I would leave my trash can out a day early and they would always email me every time, even if it was just a single extra day. This stuff is more normal than people think. If we go
That's
through
not
every
normal.
single aspect of a person's life, whether they're work, school, romantic, religious, recreational, child rearing, you'll find a bureaucracy which needles its way in. Even things that you would hopefully imagine would be sacred, like religion, ethnic pride, or sex, or the most
Ethnic
culturally
pride,
and
sacred.
sensually rich things, you'll find a bureaucrat telling you that you're doing it wrong. Britain is a great, and I guess that's not the right word, example of this process reaching a point of sheer ridiculousness. It's insane to see what's going on in Britain. The only way I can explain things is that it's a true nanny state tyranny. It's literally illegal, and you can go to jail in Britain for having offensive memes on your computer, even if you don't
yeah,
share
that's
them.
unfortunately
Hate
happened.
speech is still illegal in Britain, even if it's factually true. Keep in mind, we have technologies
understand
now
that.
due
I
to
love
the
the Keir
internet and the
Starmer.
digital revolution that Orwell never could have dreamed up in his worst nightmares, such as AIs capable of mass surveillance, as well as the little telescreens we keep in our pockets, which know every single detail of our lives. I'm sure to a horrifyingly precise degree that we can't even understand now. Britain is already installing a national surveillance system and has for decades had cameras in every major public place. Ford Motor Company is installing things that listen to people's conversations in the car to see that what the effectiveness of their advertising campaigns are. Britain is literally having jabs for fat people to lower the cost for the NHS through giving them these injections to lower their weight. That's tyranny, if anything is. The horrible thing is I don't really see a countervening force in Britain in which their conservatives have become completely controlled by a leftist uniparty, which just proves the managerial class domination thesis. When I look at the new Western
I don't know
form
if
of
it
nanny
proves
state
it.
tyranny, which manifests very strongly in Britain, I see a tyranny so ridiculous, which gains its power by its sheer insanity, which blinds its rivals into a stupor. It's remarkable to watch a meme destroy an entire society. Read this text wall for the multiple meanings of that statement. I'm friends with a lot of British conservatives, and it's horrible to see them live through this. If you folks want to know more, check out the Lotus Eaters podcast, which covers the
You want to
new
know
insane news coming out of Britain really well. Although, to be frank, I am worried that outlets like this are in danger as the British government careens more towards madness. I have British conservative friends that are leaving the country ASAP since they're afraid for their own safety in somewhere that's becoming a police state. My heart really goes out to Britain, since partly Britain is so culturally close to America that I know that if it can happen in Britain, it can very easily happen here. We also see this exact same process occurring in Australia or Canada, which are as insane, if not more insane than Britain in a lot of ways.
It's pretty crazy.
Almost all of my ancestry is from the British Isles, and so these are people who are culturally and genetically my kin. Although I find the things they are doing disgusting, it can really happen here. It's also remarkable to me that the British were the people who basically invented freedom. This gets in the way of a lot of racial innate arguments. Lots of authors from a century ago believed that the Saxon and the Celt was a genetically free race, and the events of the last few years have made me question that very deeply. Both of my parents were ethnic nationalists, with my father being very proud of being Irish and my mom being very proud of being English. I guess there's no
If you're very
wonder
proud,
that they got
listen, okay. If you're very proud of being Irish, you don't marry an Englishman. That's some American BS right there. That's crazy. You're not that proud. Okay.
divorced. And I used to think that British people had some kind of cultural aversion to tyranny, and I see that that's just not true. And it's horrible to see that my ancestors a century ago were clearing the frontier, and now we've reached the point where after centuries of maintaining this republic, we will throw it away for nothing out of boredom and silliness. One of the interesting parts in James Burnham's book on the managerial class is his predictions of the future. I spend a lot of time studying people in the past predictions of the future, since I also predict the future. Thus, I try to study whatever principles worked in the past.
He's a
James
mystic.
Burnham was writing
Predicts the
around
future.
World War II, and much like most of the most advanced rightist thinkers of the last century, was a former communist who took a Marxist class analysis and applied it through a rightist frame.
Oh,
To
fantastic.
start, he did get some stuff right. He accurately predicted that the managerial class would be able to seize total control over society. He and Francis, the other author who was really inspirational for this video, were able to clarify the sheer scope of the cultural differences that would come with this, which are difficult for most people to understand. Both really got how the managerial class would break the world in their own interests, largely since Burnham seems to have been a very astute student of the more obvious managerial regimes like Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia. However, there's one major detail that Burnham got wrong. Burnham predicted that the Western world would become completely communist, with the total loss of private property and the state consuming everything. He said that this was due to the natural self-interest of the managerial class, as I will explain in the next segment. As I read through, I started to wonder why that didn't happen. The best conclusion I could come to is that capitalism is just a superior system holistically to managerial dominance. In fact, what many of the authors mentioned at the start of this video, like McNeil, also did not realize is that when allowed to flow, capitalism will beat the managers. All the authors implicitly assume that managerialism would have the competitive advantage, probably due to it having won in the military-industrial structures of the world wars. Keep in mind the reason that governments took in the managerial revolution was because it was necessary to control the sheer scale of military-industrial economic structures that occurred with the world wars. When we look at the second half of the 20th century, the capitalist structures which survived in America due to its founders establishing a decentralized structure in both national and regional governments were able to cause breakthroughs that would beat the managers. An example of this is the Second World War, the Cold War, and later the Tech Revolution. In each case, the creativity of capitalism was able to defeat the organizational advantage the managers had. This was something I don't fault the authors of the time for not knowing. The Cold War was in many ways an answer to many questions posited in the previous century, as I explained in this text wall. One of the big things that separates us from our very recent ancestors in the 20th century is that they were blinded by the god of progress and reason. And as time has passed and we've lived through the consequences, we've since lost faith in that god, but we have to remember how much it ensnared our ancestors. There are two impulses that came with the godlike power of industrial technology. One was towards freedom and another towards slavery, which are the two normal impulses of massive breakthroughs as we can normally see in frontier cultures between the Cossacks and the serfs of Eastern Europe, or black slavery and the free democracy of North America. What I would like to ultimately say here is that this is not a matter of equality. Once Britain established the managerial class as its rulers, it saw one of the most stunning national collapses ever seen in human history.
Yeah,
the British went from the wealthiest, most technologically, culturally strongest nations in the world, with the largest empire ever in history, to a fourth-rate nation. The sun used to never set on the British Empire, but now its people are in poverty. It has nothing worthwhile to export, even culture or intellectual stuff which it used to pride itself on, and which are the normal pride of a declining once former great empire. Once they took in domination by the managerial class, the British lost everything that mattered to them as a nation. As the founding fathers would say, a man who trades his freedom for security will receive neither in the end. The horrible thing is that even though I used Britain as an example here, this is a consistent pattern across the whole world today. Even places you wouldn't think about like Argentina or Indonesia. If we look at the nations with the worst birth rates, or the second world former communist nations like China, Ukraine, or Russia, is that these are the nations which the bureaucracy had the most control over. These are the oldest nations in the world since they killed their organic cultures, like religion, family, folkways, tradition.
Margaret Thatcher mentioned. Oh, we hate you, Maggie Thatcher. You're the... okay.
And honor, so that the people had no reason to live and thus procreate. They're also not rich enough to even cover comfortable national retirements like the Germans or the Japanese. Now let's look at Europe, which is a parallel to Britain. Europe went from the most advanced place in the world, technologically, culturally, philosophically, militarily,
This is all opinion,
economically,
but
and
okay.
being a dynamo which dominated the whole planet, with nearly the whole world either being a European colony or one step removed from it. Europe has now become a museum, crashing from 40% of the world's economy in 1968 to 19% now. Surprisingly,
But what did he just said something I wanted to mention.
which dominated the whole planet.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, the end of colonialism right now is like the end of colonialism goes into like this monetary WEF or World Economic Forum. No, like the World Bank, like this type of domination of these places. It's not like the domination really ended. I mean, France has bombed like what 33 or something. Don't quote me on that number, but it's a very high number of their former colonies in Africa. They're very connected to it. There's these connections didn't necessarily end. The very hands-on rule of these places was not. It wasn't the best for the country, or it wasn't the best for the colonial leaders. They weren't profitable anymore. Or maybe they were never profitable, but they're still in control of a lot of these places. I'm going to go to the bathroom and get some more water. So getting back to the bureaucracy. Oh, okay.
In 1968 to 19% now. Surprisingly, none of those trends occurred in America, which has remarkably stayed a constant percent of the world economy since the 60s, taking in Europe's former predominance in all of those fields. When we look at the growth in the world right now, it's an almost perfect match for the weakness of the managerial class, in that growth either happens in places like Texas or Dubai that purposely allow the free market, or in poor third world countries that aren't wealthy enough to afford bureaucracies yet. Part 3, managerial incentives. I spoke earlier about how certain ruling classes have archetypal incentives, which you see over their different
Good Lord,
manifestations.
everyone left when I went to the bathroom.
What
That
that
always
means
happens.
is we can look to other societies in which the bureaucracy won to see what they did afterwards. There are a few examples before in history that we can look to.
If you're here,
in
you're the most
general, once an
important.
empire gets beyond a certain size, it needs a bureaucracy by definition to manage its sheer scope anywhere in history. The question beyond this is how much power the bureaucracy gets, and can it transplant other ruling classes, which rarely happens. In most cases, the military is able to get a stranglehold on power due to them having the guns to bully the bureaucrats. Examples of this were 19th century France, the Ottoman Turks, the Roman Empire, Tsarist Russia, the Arab Caliphate, amongst others. The only cases where this doesn't happen is in situations in which the external military threats aren't enough for the military to be strong enough to bully the bureaucracy. For an example of a strange dynamic like this, and a good place to talk about the first time in Western history the bureaucracy.
On the topic of Tolkien, by the way, one of my favorite Twitter accounts and a friend of mine, Culture Critic, his account is huge. It's like 1.6 million followers. I highly recommend following him if you haven't. It's Culture Crit, culture__ crit. He did such a good thread on Tolkien today and his influences and about the symbolism in different things. And I just love Tolkien.
Gained any real power is the French Revolution. I've been on a big French Revolution research rabbit hole lately. Taking from Tocqueville, whose book on this is unbelievably good, I now view the French Revolution as a series of class wars for control over France. Pre-revolutionary France is paradoxically...
Yes. What do you mean? Of course it's a class war. What are we talking about here? It's between the first, second, and third estates. Like it's am I crazy? Isn't that always what the French Revolution was about? How many friends has Rudyard mentioned? I'm trying to make fun of him as a person less. He says some funny stuff. I don't think he's a bad person. I don't think but he does. I guess I talk about myself sometimes. It's not that good of an idea to do it. I don't think. I talk about it when it's relevant, but he does do that in these videos. I don't think he's done it recently, but like he brings it up, and it's when you're making arguments like this, I don't think it makes sense to like bring it back to yourself and like things about you. Like I might bring up a personal story of an experience if it's relevant to understanding the topic. But yeah, that's crazy, man. I don't think you should do that. I don't think you should do that. And that's just my recommendation based on how people perceive things like that. And when he talks about it, he's like, yeah, I'm very cool. I have friends and I have coitus with women.
An absolutist monarchy, which existed
Yeah,
to
that
protect
too.
a
That
free
too.
society. In that the King of France was literally given absolute power for the purpose of maintaining French people's freedoms. France had a combination of different social elites, which competed for power between the church, nobility, monarchy, merchants, and bureaucracy. The bureaucracy had been grown to express the monarch's will. One of the most brilliant points that Tocqueville touches on is that within 2 years of the establishment of a bureaucratic committee whose role was to manage the whole French kingdom, or paralleled to the king, the French Revolution took place.
On that.
The point here is that the French Revolution was when the bureaucracy, which the king used to realize his own power, themselves realized they didn't need the king and the nobility, so they killed them. The bureaucracy went a step further and then also tried to replace the church and merchant class, as well as colonize the military with their own supporters. This is why the French Revolution failed, since the bureaucracy was still fundamentally dependent on an authoritarian king to lead them. Without that, they spiraled into crabs in the bucket, envious purges. What then happened is that with Napoleon, the military became the new king in French society, which continued over the 19th century until the bureaucracy could gain total dominance over France after the horrors of World War I. There's a handful of points I want to unpack here. The first is that the bureaucracy will always push for authoritarianism first, and then totalitarianism by its very design, unless, like China, there's an explicit religious and social structure built against it. Humans can only really organize through hierarchy or emergent phenomena. This is why you either see slavery or serfdom or capitalism over history. When the communists tried to replace capitalism, they had to default onto slavery, since that's the only real alternative. The bureaucracy, since it's against emergent living phenomena, turns the world into controlled matter which they can manipulate, thus requiring authoritarian governance. When we look at the great democratic free societies over history, like Britain, America, the Dutch, Athenians, or Romans, when they were their freest and strongest, these were societies which had a near complete absence of bureaucracies. They were governed through a combination of the free market, a strong religion providing social trust, and a nobility with a strong sense of social obligation. The bureaucracy exists to make sure stuff gets done in the absence of those other social institutions. This is why Hayek said the natural endpoint of the state's intervention into the economy was the road to serfdom, something which we've seen in the real world, as in 1920, 90% of Americans were self-employed or worked in small businesses, and in 1990, 90% were employees. Thus, bureaucracy was strong enough that France could not be a real democracy until it industrialized when the private market got strong enough. Democracy stems from the power of the merchant class or a proud warrior nobility, which are often the same thing, as I explained in this text wall. Secondly, the bureaucracy will naturally push for totalitarianism, given the bureaucracy's natural incentive. And remember, things follow their incentive without thinking or even often being able to help themselves, is towards perpetual growth. This is something Sam Francis explained really brilliantly. What has happened, and we see this very clearly through the French Revolution, is that the bureaucracy made a religion in which they were God, and the infinite growth of the bureaucracy was the morally necessary and correct path to choose. We often think of liberalism as synonymous with leftist, but the reality, which I explain in these two videos, and this is why the word liberal is so complex and contradictory, is that liberalism is actually two ideologies masquerading as the same thing. This is what Sam Francis called classical liberalism versus consensus liberalism. The difference is very much masculine versus feminine, or merchant class versus bureaucracy. Classical liberalism stems from Locke and the British Enlightenment, culminating in the American Revolution. Consensus liberalism stems from Rousseau and leads to the French Revolution. Both of them cluster around the idea of personal freedom and abstract but not reality. Classical liberalism is freedom from authority, and consensus liberalism is freedom from responsibility.
What did I just say?
Classical liberalism sees personal freedom.
Come on, I'm sure I'm going to get comments right now because it's delayed a little bit about how I muted my mic and I'm talking. He's a freaking classical liberal. These guys on Twitter, a lot of my followers are libertarians, and so I'm sure a lot of you here are. Dude, it's like the classical liberal thing is so crazy because classical liberal leads into what we have now. But yeah, liberalism, everybody knows like liberal and leftist. Sorry, maybe not everybody knows, but like liberalism and leftism are not the same thing. Liberalism is contradictory to leftism. It's like what leftism doesn't want, but they've been muddied, at least in American politics today.
Freedom as extending from God as the ultimate arbiter of political theory. Consensus liberalism stems from Rousseau's idea that the will of the people, or emotions, are the ultimate political arbiter. Classical liberals see the freedom as the government not being able to interfere in your life. Consensus liberals that the government supports you financially, allows you to get abortions, or stops discrimination, making sure things are fair. Protection from the government to protection by the government. Let me be clear that classical liberals are the objectively accurate definition of freedom and of the term liberal. Terms are completely screwed today as the left purposely obfuscates this stuff as a literal strategy that they admit to. However, the right-left division is this divide inside liberalism in which the classical liberals have a tendency to work with nationalists and religious interests, while the consensus liberals with Marxists and their descendants. We see this in the French Revolution, in which the leftist factions then basically matched the leftist coalition today, ranging from people who are close to classical liberals to literal communists. As the French Revolution went on for years, the classical liberals gradually lost out authority to people who were literal socialists. What the left's coalition has in common is that they see bureaucratic bloat as the ultimate religious aim of the human race. I explain this more so in this video. However,
yeah, we watched that one in a different reaction,
which coincidentally is only progress if carried out by the bureaucracy as the only aim of life that's worthwhile. When progress occurs under capitalism, it doesn't count. And when communism fails, it also doesn't count. Having a communist state without a bureaucracy is physically impossible. And that's really the point. One of the points Sam Francis has made is that the left's strategy is picking issues that physically can't be solved by a bureaucracy, and thus allowing infinite bureaucratic bloat. The issues with ethnic ghettos, the hysteria of Karens, the innate biological differences between classes, races, and sexes, inequality, hierarchy, empire, war, struggle, a sense of self, tradition, and the nation itself. It's important to see the left as the bureaucracy declaring war on all human and even non-human life, trying to rupture and control it all. You can give the left all they could ever want and more, as we've already done in our society, and as we see, they'll demand even more, given the bureaucracy demands infinite bloat. As it grows, the bureaucracy must grow ever bigger, like the Midgard serpent eating its own tail. From this perspective, the left sounds completely insane, and it is. However, the reason they were able to even think of this is that the 20th century involved giving the state complete power over almost all aspects of human life. Literal
if I'm
electricity,
talking less,
water,
I'm usually
and
agreeing
food,
with it.
alongside work, media, and education. This is the power the god emperors of Egypt and Peru would have killed for. Thus, we made the state our god, and the extension of its power was our religion. The first country in Europe to develop a strong, centralized bureaucratic state was France, and thus that's where leftism first started with the French Revolution. I don't think people realize how much power we've already given unelected bureaucratic officials, with the executive branch or the FBI and CIA as good examples. Again, these are people the public never consented to, but unelected officials appointed them. Now they control almost every element of human life, between economics, between who the state spies on, between foreign relations, even stuff that's romantic or personal life or the family. The bureaucracy has unelected almost infinite power over. This is why the American Revolution worked and the French fell into insane despotism almost immediately, even though they were both liberal. The American Revolution existed with clear boundaries established by the merchant classes in the South's slave-owning nobility, that in order to maintain freedom, you had to separate power. In the French Revolution, the bureaucracy declared war on human life and society, which failed, as it has to. De Tocqueville said something...
This is interesting because I just did a thread today on Native American influences on the Constitution and on early America. That's on my Twitter, ill_scholar. Also, if you're just joining us, welcome. And please like the video, subscribe. And if you'd like, check out the Patreon to support me for $2 a month, as well as Axios Fitness. But I think that, like, because you also have the, what's his name? The guy, Cromwell. Yeah, Cromwell, Lord Protector, right? And, you know, he wasn't exactly a liberal, but You have this happen in France where it goes back to authoritarianism. And then in America, I think the difference is that in America, we have like European people that come here, but then they interact with this new geography. And it's a specific type of person, right? So we get a specific type of population. There's a self-selection of the people that started the country, that started the culture of the area. And the culture that is there, it gets affected by new people coming in, but there's a lot of evidence in a book like 13 Nations, which is one of my favorite books by Colin Woodard, that culture is what stays in perpetuity. When that culture that came from the beginning of a place, even when new immigrants come in, new people come in and they blend in, they do affect it, but it always retains a large foundation of that original culture. And that original culture was founded on the frontier and in interaction with a much more wild, not entirely wild, because even the hunter-gatherers of the Americas were affecting their environment through controlled burning and things like that, but a much more wild than Europe's environment. And the way that people interact with their environment is what creates culture and the need for culture. And that's both human and physical environment. So who your neighbors are. And there are a lot of influences. Like the Americans are a people and a culture that comes from, yes, that European root originally, and Northern European and Protestant at that, but like different types of them, and molded in this new environment with interaction with these other people of these other cultures. I know, Native Americans are less than 2% of the US population today, but in the past there were a lot more of them, and there was a lot of interaction with Native Americans in their traditional cultures. Obviously culture changes, it's dynamic over time, but in much closer to living in traditional methods versus today where they live, very similar to other Americans. So yeah, that's how I feel about it. Let's keep going.
So beautiful here that so many in the ruling regime of France during the revolution said they loved mankind or the nation in abstract, and yet you could see them do the worst things to the people around. Who is the abstract nation of people they love if everyone they actually deal with as an individual they give suffering? The left created a false simulacrum or imitation of the world in which the growth of the bureaucracy was ordained by their god of dialectical progress. I hope you see from this how the story of the last 200 years has in large part been the growth of the bureaucracy over Western civilization. This isn't just leftism, in which fascism is just as much a managerial ideology. The Industrial Revolution and centralization of government demanded management in order to keep the sheer scale of things cooperating. A majority urban society demands bureaucracy since humans did not evolve to cooperate on this scale, and thus you need paperwork to fill the evolutionary gap. Another example posited by the French Revolution is that it's impossible to hold the bureaucracy accountable. I talk about this more in the communism video, in which the way communism works by nature is that no one can ever be held accountable for anything. This is a bigger detail than it sounds, since it means nothing can be accomplished and you can't have any standards. Let's say you run a company or a school and you can't fire bad employees.
Yeah,
you would
let's
stop
say you
accomplishing anything. The irony, something that Oren McIntyre touches on very well with his book The Total State, another very good source on this topic, is that the bureaucracy in the modern world was established as a check on the worst, most animalistic parts of human nature. The irony is that it just enables its worst evils. This is since the bureaucracy can't be held responsible for any of its actions, and it has no standards to assess itself against. This is why the worst atrocities in history, such as the Holocaust, the Great Leap Forward, the Holodomor, Qin Shi Huangdi's tyranny, and Caligula, were all carried out by the bureaucracy. Bureaucracies exist as a tool to wield power. That's their purpose. They are established inside structures since they're very good at either extending the reach of power or its duration. The problem with that is that they become addicted to power, much like the One Ring to rule them all. The worst part of the bureaucracy is its complete inhumanity, and that besides the secret police, which is another form of bureaucracy, is that it's the least human and living of all the ruling classes. This is the origin of Hannah Arendt's theories on the banality of evil, in which she studied the Holocaust Holocaust and found that the humans who perpetuated it were all pretty boring people. The logic here is that the bureaucracy can perpetuate the worst evils under the guise of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the idea that that which does the most good for most people is the best. The problem with this logic is that it leaves out context, and so without other belief structures, utilitarianism can be used to justify the most horrifying evils. A majority of wolves voting to eat the minority of sheep. Modernity thinks evil has to be some Genghis Khan burning cities down, but no, it can be very ordinary and very boring. We've said many negative things about the bureaucracy so far, but as a counterpoint, let's look to a society where the bureaucracy has both done the best and also in which it was able to maintain its power stably for thousands of years. The only major pre-industrial society I can think of in which the bureaucracy gained total social authority was China. Interestingly enough, the French revolutionaries were obsessed with China, and Rousseau's idea of the social contract stems from the ancient Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven. China was run by a ruling class called the Mandarins. The language Mandarin, or the dominant Chinese language today, stems from the dialect they spoke in the Middle Ages. The Mandarins took over China gradually 2,000 years ago under the Han Dynasty.
Okay, so we know
China's
that.
ruling class
Also,
was chosen
Mandarin,
by having young men take a test. Whoever's
Mandarin is the language. It's not the ethnic group. Yeah, you have a good night too, Blue. Like, you know, the Han Chinese ethnic group isn't, you know, that much of a cohesive ethnic group, but none of them really are that much. And there's differences. They're a lot more cultural than people are willing to admit. Obviously, there are DNA, there are genetic differences between people, but the groups we choose to identify them with are not as uniform as you might think on the standards they have. But it's the Han Chinese. It's not, Mandarin is just the language. And I think Mandarin, and there's a bunch of minority languages, and like, I think 52 recognized minority populations in China. But the Han Chinese are 90%, and Mandarin speakers are most of them. And then there's Cantonese in southern China, which is the second most. But they're not different people. I know there is animosity between them, as there is between any groups that divide themselves. But it's not like it's not like they're a different group. I don't know why he's talking about it like that.
Scored highest on said test would then be given government positions, which they could then financially loot for their own gain. Families would invest for generations and hope that their children would get said government jobs in order to repay their investment. The bureaucracy suppressed China's capitalism, and wealthy merchants would in turn buy land and try to get their children government positions as soon as they could. To start, there were negatives with China's bureaucrat ruling class, which we alluded to at the start of this video. For most of history, China was the wealthiest and most technologically advanced society in the world, and they invented the printing press, gunpowder, and the compass. However, China stagnated for centuries, never using any of the technology, having colonies, or adopting ideas from the West. When the British sent a delegation to China in 1791 with technology 500 years more advanced than anything China had,
That is not how technology works. You're not a technology is not years more advanced than another technology. Whatever.
the Chinese said the British had nothing to offer them of any interest.
Yes.
China nearly had an
right. That is in the letter that I'm talking about. It's he barely touched on the treasure fleets.
ideas from the West. When the British sent a delegation to China in 1791 with technology 500 years more advanced than anything China had, the Chinese said the British had nothing to offer.
Right. They had nothing to offer. The way that capitalism works or the free market works is that people decide what they want and what they value. And if they value the goods that they have to offer at $0 and they don't want them, that's how much they value them. That's the free market. They don't want them. Just because it's created in the future doesn't mean that it's better and someone should definitely want it. How would it help them? It's like the things that we use, they matter if we can fit them into our culture. Like, what are you, like, you have trucks, right? But if you don't have a culture that knows how to drive trucks or is interested even in learning about them, like if you went back 500 years, you introduced trucks anywhere and you just said, oh yeah, here we have these goods. You're just offering goods. Like what? Like you think the steppe tribes on the Eurasian steppe are going to start riding around in Toyota Hiluxes? They're just going to understand that. They're going to understand the need for maintenance. They have the infrastructure to perform the maintenance. Like I know he's not talking about cars here, but like they don't want the stuff. Different cultures are just different. There's no, we were talking about this at the beginning. There's no linear trajectory to this. So he's viewing this entirely from a European Eurocentric lens of that technological tract, but that technological tract was created for Europe. It was created by European people in Europe, in cultures of Europe. You know, it actually is like toilets in India because like, and I wrote a thread about this where I was talking about like a ethnographic look into the open defecation issue in India. And for a large percentage of the population, it's like 18% of Indians. So it's most Indians today use toilets, okay, to be clear. But there's a large, sizable population, like equal to, in absolute terms, because India is a massive country with 1.5 billion people, in absolute terms, as much population as live in the United States don't use toilets. They openly defecate. And literally, toilets are culture. They are a cultural advance. And if you don't have a culture that uses toilets, and there's things about the toilets, like I've heard one of the complaints is that they're often extraordinarily dirty, and they'd rather go outside than use a dirty bathroom. And I've gone to the bathroom outside. I was in the Marine Corps. I'd rather go outside. I wouldn't do it on a train track or in a river, but I'd rather go outside with a freaking e-tool and dig a hole and just go outside and feel the free wind on my, backside than go in a dirty bathroom. But I digress quite a bit, actually. That was a little bit too much. Let's get back to it.
Them of any interest. China nearly had an industrial revolution.
Yeah. The point is toilets are culture, and yes, it is like toilets in India. If a culture doesn't have a use for the item within their culture, they're not going to want it, and that's fine. And, ultimately that did screw up China, but also it did screw up China because they lost all authority 100 years later. Tens of millions, probably over 100 million people died even before communism came in, and then another 40 million died. But there's some growing pains, but that's what happens. It is chaotic. Political technology is also technology.
They sent ships out as far as Kenya, and they possibly reached America. Well, each time the bureaucracy actively shut them down, either by regulating the factories in the 11th century or burning the treasure fleets in the 15th. China has spent a majority of the last 1,000 years governed by barbarian conquerors who the Chinese have normally outnumbered 100 to 1, since the bureaucracy purposely starved the Chinese military of talent and funding, knowing that if it gains enough power, it would supplant the bureaucracy. If you want to know more, watch the video I made on Chinese civilization. However, even with all of this, in the pre-modern world, you could very convincingly argue that China was the most successful civilization in human history ever. China was consistently the most populous, united, technologically advanced, wealthiest, civilized state for much of the pre-modern world. China clearly worked as a society while having a bureaucracy. So what about China's bureaucratic system allowed them to maintain said stable society while the bureaucracy in modern history has largely been cancerous? Part of the answer is that China's religion, Confucianism, had pre-established protections against the predatory elements in the bureaucracy. Said bureaucracy was beholden to tradition and forced to study the classics as the predominant selection measure. This would be as if America selected its ruling class through Bible study, which ends up with a very different demographic than the current bureaucracy. This also prevents them from using the religion of progress to demand continuous growth forever. China's bureaucracy had made their peace with the universe, not declaring war on life. Confucianism very much prioritizes reciprocal relations, which created inbuilt measures against predating on the population too horrifically. Secondly, China's...
Yes, wait. I want to expand on
Confucianism very much prioritizes reciprocal relations, which created inbuilt measures against predating dating
Awesome.
on the population too horrifically.
Yes, yes. Oh my God, that was probably the smartest thing he's ever said. So in Confucianism, there's like paternal relationships. So it's like patronage. You have like the ruler who to his people. There are things that the ruler has to do for the people. There's things that the people have to do for the ruler, and there's rules that govern that. And husband to wife, parents to children, like any sort of these reciprocal relationships, the people who are in charge and have the responsibility, they have the responsibility for the people that are under them, and the people under them have responsibility to the people above them. And this plays in a lot with work culture in China today as well. And it also, was probably part of what created the conditions that made communism a thing, but Maoism really. And then I'm gonna answer this right before we get back in. Was I not playing the video on the screen? Was it just my face? Sorry, I'm ordering food. I couldn't do that before. Hi from Australia. What are your thoughts on Aboriginal history? So the only things I have to say about it is, number one, like I've talked about before, the very, very terrible boarding schools that happened in America for Indians, for American Indians in Canada. It is similar to feudalism, Graham. Sorry. I lost the comment. Why did I stop in the middle of that? The boarding schools for Native Americans that there was a lot of bad stuff that happened there. I've talked about it before, so I won't go all into it. But, I know that happened to them as well as to Canadians and American natives. And I think their religion is based on dreaming, which I think is incredibly cool. I've also thought that, somebody in a religious position could, I guess, there's no confirming. They could just say whatever, but it is about dreams, and I think that's very unique across the world. I don't know of any other people that has a religion based on that. And also, one time I saw a YouTube video that was like, "Don't be Rama Rama," and about not sniffing petrol, which is gasoline for the Americans, and that was crazy. I don't know what all that's about, but those are my 3 thoughts on Aboriginal Australians. I took a whole class on them, actually, in an anthropology class with this French professor. She was French. She was an anthropology professor who was French. Yeah, that's how I feel about Aboriginal Australians. The "don't be Rama Rama" thing, which I guess means R slurred. But yeah, let's keep going.
Secondly, China's bureaucrat nobility were predominantly landowners. They were rural people who owned land and then used the revenue from said land to invest in educating their children so that they could.
Sorry, right when we started, I got to address it. Thank you so much. That's a very generous donation. I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, please like the video, everybody. Donating is much appreciated. Totally not necessary, but thank you so much, Squid, for that. Very, very generous. $10. I appreciate it. Does the religion explain how China was able to invent gunpowder and not really figure out its uses like the Europeans did? So when we think about religion in the West, it's very much like a mutually exclusive thing. You can't be, and this is a monotheistic idea. It's you can't be a Christian and a Muslim and a Jew. You can't be those 3 things at the same time. You got to pick one of them. Whereas in polytheistic religions in the past, that generally isn't the case. It's there are different gods, and there's different patron gods of your profession and your city and your area that, people there tend to worship a certain god more than others, or people in a certain group worship a certain god other. And that's not true in China, where there are different types. There's Taoism, Confucianism, legalism, which, these have traits of religions, but the definitions of religion that we have in the West are based on Western academia, and they have built into them these monotheistic and Abrahamic and specifically Christian, really, biases of how, those are just built in. I'm not saying bias as a bad thing. It's everyone's bias. Everyone has their cultural reference point where they view the world. So our definitions of religion are heavily, heavily influenced by that. And they don't really work when you go to China. But Confucianism, Taoism, legalism less, it's more like a political philosophy. But all of these different like categories we put things in are created by our own academic system. They're a compartmentalization of ways of life. And that itself is a cultural idea. But how the culture in general, I don't know about the religion, but the culture in general is kind of what decides what they do with things. So they were able to invent gunpowder and not really figure out its uses like the Europeans did. I wouldn't say that that's about them not figuring out the uses. It's more about the uses they wanted to use it for. And I don't know why the Chinese would not have wanted to use gunpowder for warfare, but at the same time, it's like any sort of gunpowder used in fireworks. It seems like an active choice not to use it in warfare rather than anything else, because like we know that they had the wheel for the Aztecs, we also know that I'm sorry if you weren't here for that. Like the Aztecs had the wheel, but they didn't use it because they didn't have large pack animals. It doesn't mean they weren't advanced because they didn't have the wheel, because they understood the wheel, but they chose not to use it within their culture because it didn't make sense based on their geography and their culture. And in a similar way, gunpowder in China, for whatever reason, they didn't want to use it in guns. And we don't have proof that they knew that it would work. But the idea that this thing that explodes could push a projectile out into something, especially for people that had crossbows and everything, I find it hard to believe that they didn't have the idea to use it in something like a gun. It's probably just that they decided not to. So I hope that answers your question. This is the chaos that's brought by new technology. And we know that there was an active choice in China for them not to use new technologies from what they were talking about earlier. And I've done content on that letter before.
Passed the tests. This created a connection to both the Earth and the people missing from our current bureaucracy, who exists as a separate caste from the population. This all reminds me of how the West, for the first time since World War II, became an elite based off test taking. I find this interesting since it's an enormous cultural difference versus the old elite, which stemmed either from being businessmen or being part of the nobility. On top of this, it backfired very quickly in that college is already within a lifetime failed as a selection tool for a future ruling class. The West briefly tried the Chinese system and rejected it nearly immediately. Part 4, the future. If you were to ask me what the future of the bureaucracy in the West is, I largely think they've doomed themselves.
I should say quickly that Whatifalthist, like how he makes YouTube videos, like how simple they are. I'm not even hating on him here, but like how he was making them was part of my inspiration for actually going on YouTube, because I was like, look, I don't have to have the highest production quality. This guy's just doing that. That's pretty cool. Like I can do that. If he can do that, like I can do that. I got better ideas than him probably. I like his videos, but yeah. So he's actually a lot of my inspiration for starting YouTube, regardless of what anybody might think of him. I don't dislike the guy. I will make fun of him. I don't dislike him.
In America at least. To explain why, I will use 3 words, those being internet, artificial intelligence, and wokeness. For the first two, we were dependent upon the bureaucracy in an industrialized civilization in which you had to coordinate lots of people at once. The internet and AI immediately crush both of those. The internet allows asynchronous emergent cooperation. AI could replace all the managerial jobs overnight now. We don't need the bureaucracy anymore.
For
the third, the West experiment with
bureaucracy
recently has been so cursed, I think they're going to end up overstaying their welcome. Communism and fascism, 2 sides of the managerial coin, killed 150 million people combined, or by far the bloodiest event in history. An interesting thing my friend Samo Berger once said is that the World Economic Forum is an attempt to automate population collapse, in that the world's population needs to collapse by at least half by the end of this century. The bureaucracy saw this, and as the bureaucracy's bureaucracies do, thought that they should make a system out of it, which they call degrowth. Degrowth is so incredibly dystopian that I could have never even guessed it would have existed 10 years ago. And the reason it's so insane is it's taking something that should never be turned into a system and making it a bureaucracy. It's something only our
It's a fake
society
laugh
would be
for me,
so
man. Maybe it's
simultaneously
not fake,
both
but it sounds
stupid
fake.
and intelligent enough to do. Imagine if the Romans had
Hell
a
yeah.
government agency
Those are my
called
people
"Let's
right
import
there."
the Goths, shrink the economy, make the peasants poor, and destroy the currency," and that was what their ideology told them to do. The problem is the bureaucracy is doing all of that stuff now, and they're telling us that it's good. The bureaucracy never deals with living
Okay.
people, and thus their
Based.
ability to understand others is ridiculously poor. This is why they produce content which just looks completely ridiculous, and they
Yeah, that
should
really is the thing.
know must horribly backfire. Examples include the recent Guys for Kamala, Stephen Colbert's vaccine dance, or the Velcro video. If you haven't watched it, watch all of those. They're comedy gold. Any normal person would know that a normal person would take these as basically an insult. This is why they're shocked people are angry that they
The
are
Force
actively
is
trying to
female.
drive their
The
nations
Force doesn't
in
have
everything
gender.
they love.
This is why you don't understand Star Wars, Kathleen Kennedy, because you say stupid things like the Force is female. The Force isn't male. It's not female. It's not non-binary. The Force is the Force. Freaking nerds. Not even good nerds. Okay, that's not relevant to this channel.
Extinct. Keep in mind, studies have consistently found conservatives can understand how leftists think, but leftists cannot understand how conservatives think at all. Keep in mind, our managerial elite purposely never cross-references
I'd
their
like to see
theories
that
against
study.
actual humans. For example, our social sciences make using history to understand the world taboo. I made this video on this topic for those who are
Jesus.
interested. What this means is that
Caravaggio, I
our plans for how we govern
Caravaggio,
ourselves
I
are
can't
basically
pull that
built
up, but
off
that's hilarious.
complete delusional fantasies not grounded in anything
up, brother?
real.
How you doing?
As I said before, the left has declared war on human life. Secondly, the bureaucracy established a world so sterile and dead that no one can have kids. Only a bureaucrat could think up a concept like the current concept of consent. If a woman is
What?
naked in your
Oh,
bed of
God.
her own volition, that's consent, not filling out a form before she comes home to your place. Part of the reason that our birth rate is collapsing
Dude.
so hard, and so many young people say it's immoral
All
to
right,
have
look, I get the point that he's getting at, but the words that he said are not great. Like, let's not, I think that Whatifalthist should stay away from discussions of consent. I think that would be a good idea.
children is since we live in a world that's so sterile and anti-human that the
I
bureaucracy
agree
didn't
with.
build it for people but for cogs. As the new age starts, we need to make an active effort to build a society based around the crazy monkeys we are, not around some bureaucrats' delusions of completely breaking life for the DMV
Return
employees.
to monkey. Okay. You guys want another Whatifalthist video? Somebody recommended, I made a community post. Somebody recommended, what's that one? Recommended like fiction stuff. And I just talked about Star Wars. So it reminded me of that. Like fictional cultures. I think I had tried that in the past. I'm not going to do that today, but is that something you guys would like? Like, you know, there's like lore videos that go into different cultures and like in Star Wars, like different species and, you know, how they develop, how they freaking, how they make their way in the galaxy. I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the galaxy. I'm a big Star Wars fan, by the way. I don't know if I've ever talked about that, but I don't know. That's something I've thought about doing. I'm going to play another Whatifalthist video, by the way, in a minute or two. So don't leave. I know people will anyway, but that's okay. Like the video, please. Patreon's $2 a month down below. Always got to periodically remember to plug. But would people like that? I don't really know how to say something on it, but I think I could make it happen. On like Star Wars videos on of different species. I'm repeating myself now, but I'm trying to get my point across. Whatever. That's a thing. I don't know. Old documentaries. So I've tried to do this, D503. I've done that once, and I did it a second time, but I got copyright claimed. And unfortunately, even if they're on YouTube, I think I can't really do that because they're all copyright protected. If not, I would be doing that regularly. But I'll maybe try to see if I can do that again and see if I don't get copyright claimed. Please no fiction, at least not cringe like Star Wars, maybe more real world anthropology. Ordering cultures from best to worst. I don't think I could do that, but I thought about doing a tier list for something. I've also thought about ordering, like there are these services that order you food from like different countries, like different snacks and stuff. And I thought about like getting them, and then I could do that as an affiliate, like I can promote that thing and try the different snacks and make a tier list of the snacks. I could also probably tier list like older cultures, just not modern ones, or in a specific place. Those are more full videos though. What about movies? What on movies though? Like specifically. What are you sad about, D503? I would love to do documentaries. I'm glad people are saying that, but I hope I find out a way to do it without getting copyright claimed. We're gonna go into Shattering the Glass of Modernity now. 149.30. You can keep giving me suggestions in the comments if you want as well. Casablanca. I've actually never even seen that. I know it's like a famous movie. I would really, really love to do this. I hope I can figure out how.
Everything has infinite dimensions.
Everything
I don't
has
really
infinite
mean that in a
dimensions.
scientific
Okay, great.
sense where we currently exist in a three-dimensional space. At least that's our current paradigm. Rather, I mean dimension as a trait something has. For example, when you meet a person, you can assess them for their moral quality, which is a certain important dimension of behavior, their intelligence, happiness, or their class, sex, or racial type.
Okay.
For
I
each,
agree
they
with
are
that.
dimensions of their persona, which change how their lives work. In order to understand a person, you need to have a comprehensive understanding of how they can relate to their context. This is so complex as to be impossible to do perfectly, yet we have to do it all the time to survive in the world. I've been thinking more and more lately about why people don't notice
know
what
if
the
I can
natural
watch that one.
endpoint of their actions are. This relates to Aristotle's concept of the telos, or that all things have a natural direction they flow towards without even thinking.
This is
For
like
example,
animistic
almost
ideas.
all things, even the inanimate like hurricanes, nations, or glaciers, will without even thinking try to expand themselves against other things, even if unconsciously. Governments will
okay.
naturally try to
Cool.
extend
This
their
is
power, and the
anthropology.
sexes will try to mate with the other. However, it
Sick.
always blows my
Except if
mind
you're
when the
gay.
consequences for an action are completely obvious, and yet people are dumbfounded
Dude, the
by the
fake laugh,
result.
don't-
The American government printed the most money of any era of history, and then we're shocked when we see inflation. The
No one-
inflation should be
dude,
way, way worse
okay.
than what it
Listen, that is right. Organizations have the way that they function, but then individuals, like the environment that you're in changes over time. And also there are people acting on their own personal incentives in those places that have particular like wants and needs. And so sometimes that's why you can't stop bad things. That's why you can't stop like the Fed printing a bunch of money, because of personal incentives. As different people come in with different personal incentives, as these groups, like special interest groups that have been created, as they grow and they have their own ideas and they have their own wants and their own things separate from the country. This is why culture is so important. Yeah, so I don't agree entirely with what he's saying right now, but that's fine.
is now. People eat unhealthy food and are shocked
Awesome.
when they get
Love
fat.
unhealthy
People
food.
spend their whole lives in sin and godlessness with
Yeah, I
no
was thinking about
interaction with
that.
meaning, and then they're shocked when they feel
Normally.
unfulfilled. For years, I've struggled to learn what living a happy life truly means. You think it's empty words until you realize what it's like to not live with it.
Oh,
Most
God.
people I've known in my life
I wish
have
people that
not
are
been
22
happy,
would
and
have
as a
lost
child,
one.
I
That's so
vowed to
fucked up.
construct my life in a way where I could be happy as an adult. This has been a harder journey than I could have imagined, that I've asked the wisest people I know in my life. These are the people I respect, often very accomplished, like CEOs, politicians, artists, and thinkers. I ask them, how does one live a happy happy life today as a young man. The most blackpilling thing is that no one's really given me a good answer so far. This video is an endpoint of my search for this question. In order for us to be happy as a society and the individuals in that society, here are 12 assumptions we have to shatter as a culture. These are 12 ways that we see the world.
Okay. So one thing I should say is that I sometimes look at these videos and I'm like, okay, how many dislikes does it have? What's the ratio here? And this one has more dislikes than most of them do. So I think we're gonna get some bad takes here, and I'm here for it. I'm in for it. I love it.
Tearing us down to misery and hell in real time. This is a video, the soul of modern civilization. As you will see, I choose to shatter the glass and restart, since I see no other path where we survive both as a culture and as individuals.
Come on, dog. Is there anthropological evidence for libertarianism or liberalism in general, like past civilizations? Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit. It's anytime when you reach culturally or like culturally in modern times or over time for past cultures, it's much harder to place ideologies that are created in a certain, like in our modern environment or any other environment. Those like ideas, they tend to relate less to things in the past, but there's definitely societies, especially more traditional societies or the law of nature, like wild men living in just bands, not even organized tribes. There's some validity to that argument, but it's always an argument based on our own perception of those societies. So it's hard to say yes and no. I would love to do that for a video. But I'm talking more about reactions here. Like I have more video ideas than I know what to do with. Not that I won't take them, but I'm talking about like, I like doing the reaction streams because people can just come and hang out. And, I spend a lot of time alone writing and stuff. And I talk to people like in the context of this work, and that's about it. So it's nice to like get some parasocial interaction and do something that requires a little less, hard research and everything. I also write a lot on Twitter. If you're not on there, I have a lot of threads on there. I'm actually more popular on Twitter than I am on YouTube or X. But yeah, let's go. Good question.
Our perception of the world is largely an illusion held together by biased media that intentionally obfuscates things to keep up the mirage. Thankfully, Ground News helps me get a clear view of the world. Ground News isn't a news outlet. It's an app and website that pulls in NBC.
What's his code? I'll share it, and then we'll go.
Same plan I use for unlimited access to media isn't showing you. Documented immigrants, 40%.
Ground.news.
For those who don't think our society is very sick in a profound way, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah,
You're either old enough to be removed from the main generative force of the society, or your head is buried 1,000 miles into the sand. I would say, what evidence would you need to see that our society is terminally sick on a spiritual basis?
A good question.
I mean, I could point to dozens of different things, between the skyrocketing deaths of despair, crippling mental health issues, depression, or loneliness. All of these are at the worst points ever in human history. I'm going to be more holistic, though. The democratically elected Western governments.
But generally, by the way, people don't end their own life in like traditional societies like hunter-gatherers. You could probably make the argument that people that are that sad probably just, they're just too, like they would just perish anyway. But it also seems like there's something to the argument that whatever that life is like, it makes people not want to do that. There was a story I heard when I was getting my anthropology degree from a teacher, or from a professor rather, and they were talking, I don't remember if this was like written down anywhere. I think it was, but somebody was talking to like a traditional tribe, and they told them that their friend had committed suicide or unalived themselves. I'm not supposed to say that here. And the people in this tribe, I think it was the Amazon or something, they just laughed about it. They laughed because they thought it was a joke. They're like, what do you mean? People don't do that. Like they didn't even have the concept of it. Now that's just one tribe. So I don't know, maybe that's not always the case, but there's something there.
are trying to commit civilizational suicide. Many countries in Northern Europe are openly championing degrowth and deindustrialization as their dominant political agenda. Every major Western government is importing millions of immigrants again.
But the fact that it is a sin means that it's, that implies the existence of the practice.
Against their own economic self-interest for the express purpose of replacing the local white population. Nearly 100% of new jobs in America since COVID and in the last few years have gone to immigrants. Diversity.
Did he say 100%?
Of replacing the local white population. Nearly 100% of new jobs in America
100%.
since COVID and in the last few years have gone to immigrants. Diversity quotas have completely destroyed the West economy, so much so that nearly all job openings in the top 500 companies for the last few years have gone to no.
People of color accounted for 94% of new hires. I think I'm familiar with this number, and that is pretty crazy. But I think the larger point is it's not just the new jobs, but it's like new jobs minus oh God, what was it? Never mind. It doesn't matter.
Non-whites. Keep in mind, white people are around 75% of America's genetics, and the number is higher in Europe. So being anti-white is just being suicidal for the West. The entire West's cultural forms have been taken up by a church, which rationalizes every single facet of life into an inchoate nihilism, which only pushes for its own destruction. You can add this to the birth rate, which is at the lowest rate ever in history. The birth rate today is crashing almost everywhere in the world, faster than the fastest UN or government projections could have guessed. Keep in mind that these people and these statistics have really wide standard deviations, so what's going on now borders on the apocalyptic. This is the greatest crisis of our time, while at the same time something almost no leaders or regimes around the world take seriously. A quarter of Gen Z Americans think it's morally wrong to have children, and the numbers are even higher in Northern Europe. I've talked about all these points in previous videos, in which the one I would like to recommend the most is my video on the psychological Black Death. However, what all of this underlies is that we are a profoundly psychologically or spiritually sick culture, the most that has ever existed that I can see so far ever in human history. Furthermore, this sickness is killing us very quickly. One of my favorite historians, Carol Quigley, writing around 1960, when ranking the West's social institutions, said that the West's great weakness was its lack of religion. He said that if the West couldn't solve its failed religious issue, that no matter how wealthy or technologically advanced we were, we would see the rise of a cancerous anti-religion, which would destroy Western civilization.
So there's actually a quote from Russell Brand, which I really like, where he talks about, he says the human species is a species that worships, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think this is pretty close to it. The human species is a species that worships, and if we do not choose what we worship, it will be chosen for us. And I think that that's very true. Regardless of how we define religion and whether people say they're religious, it's my opinion at least, and I think this is supported based on human history, that all humans are religious. It's just what we describe by our culture as religion, it might not fit into what somebody's religion is in whatever religion really means. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. As soon as you even say a word, it's culture. Words in speech are culture. And that means they're culturally determined. They're not innate like God's realm. So even saying a word like religion, you're getting into what is the human, not the divine. It's so it can be changed. It's cultural. Yeah.
I'm so glad nothing like that's ever happened. One of the rules I have is that before I judge someone, I try to listen to what they're really saying, or often literally saying. This sounds profoundly stupid and simple, but almost no one actually does it. For example, modern Western women publicly state their complete contempt for men all the time. Just look at any media. The left publicly states their complete self-loathing of their own society and their heritage.
This is a media thing. This is a freaking media thing. It might be a vocal minority, but it's a minority. Most women are not actively talking about how they hate men. This is his perception. He's probably hanging out with liberals. I'd go outside.
This means they really loathe themselves. They believe this so strongly that they also literally state that they support civilizational suicide. Hamas literally says, from the river to the sea. The Chinese Communist Party literally says it wants to recreate the old Chinese empire from the Qing.
How is from the river to the sea civilizational unaliving? How? It's talking about a specific geographical area. That has no relation to that.
Dynasty. Iran literally calls America the Great Satan. Modernity has this very profound naivete, which I can't understand, but is probably our greatest weakness.
No, it doesn't only exist online. It just exists in specific circles. Like, I don't talk to women that say things like that. I don't know a single woman who talks like that. If a woman I was around talked like that, I would no longer be around that woman.
The Marxists take over our institutions while they literally publicly said they want to destroy everything we love. The British and French appeased Nazi Germany when the Nazis also literally said they wanted to genocide Eastern Europe for their Lebensraum. This is one of the stupidest mistakes we make as a society. I partly blame social feminization. Dozens of scientific studies, as well as just the common wisdom, is that women are attracted to dark triad traits like Machiavellianism, sociopathy, and narcissism. The stereotype goes that women are attracted to bad boys who treat them terribly. Literally read any female romance novel or even ask women about the guys they've dated, and this is just obvious. Thus, it makes sense that a feminine society would have an unspoken, deep attraction for those who wished its ill and completely reject its value.
Wait a minute.
Terribly. Literally read any stereotype goes that like Machiavellianism, sociopathy, and narcissism. The stereotype goes that women are attracted to bad boys who treat them.
Is that just Machine Gun Kelly? They don't look bad. They look, and I don't mean gay as an insult, but just they look homosexual, like just objectively.
Terribly. Literally read any female romance novel or even ask women about the guys they...
Dude, this is two guys wearing Carlton sweaters. Is he showing these guys as bad guys? They're wearing sweaters. Is it because they're black? What, am I crazy here? This is so weird. Neither of these sets of dudes look like bad guys. He could have shown like a meth head and like a gang member. Does he think this is what a gang member looks like? He's like, oh yeah, black guys with sweaters and their pants are a little low. Those are bad guys. They're smiling. Well, one guy's smiling. They got nice haircuts. What is he saying? Those are some down low brothers. They know how to dress. I mean, it's not my style, but it's stylish for somebody. I like the sweaters. I might wear the sweater. That brand is popular with rappers / dealers. Oh, I didn't know that. I don't think he knows that either. Maybe he does, though. White guys with leather jackets are sus, though. Okay. Yeah, dude, I mean, I don't know. They could be something. They don't look like anything to me.
They've dated, and this is just obvious. Thus, it makes sense that a feminine society would have an unspoken, deep attraction for those who wished its ill, and completely...
Dude, just the idea that these two guys wish society ill, like maybe, I doubt it.
reject its values. You can call me a misogynist all you want, but am I actually...
Dude, it's just like stock footage of a guy sitting down in front of graffiti wearing like tube socks. What is this? They did look like geeks, dude. Yeah, the two guys, I'd say they study in liberal arts or social sciences at uni. Yeah, I bet they did, because I was in liberal arts and social science at uni, and those were the types of people I was around. They're nerds, dude. Like, what are we talking about here?
Wrong. I don't know why others can't see this, since it's so ridiculously obvious to me. I just listen to what people say and then form an assessment from it. I see it on the right too, in which moderate conservatives will often work with radical rightists, where I tell them, you know, if those radicals win, they're going to put all of us in camps. So why are you trying to appease them? When I hear leftists or political radicals in general, I can see that they're in a tremendous amount of pain. Sure, there are always sociopaths in a population who will naturally like to predate fight off others, but they're less than 20 to 5% of the population naturally.
lot.
When you see most political radicals, you're seeing a person whose soul has been so consumed and chewed up by the cruelty and dehumanization of the world. In order
Okay, so I would say what I would associate with radicals, and I don't know if I'm right or not, but I would associate like if somebody's radical politically, it means the rest of their life isn't going that well. We have like insane, like people can't afford anything. We have massive consumer debt on a whole, I'm saying, like most people, and a growing number of people. Like the society's not working for them. And that creates radicals. I think that makes sense. That's how I feel. Yeah, I'm right. Like, radical in the sense that like people use radical as like, oh, they have crazy ideas. But really, I would say like, I think there's like a college definition for radical, and it's essentially like something that's very outside of like what is normal, like what's expected within the Overton window, essentially. And I think that it's my perception, at least, that it's growing, that the percentage, the rate of radicals is growing, but I don't know. I like how Scholar took what If said and made it simple common sense. That's what I'm here for, brother. I'm here to translate more like Whatifalthist is not an academic, but academics, they're very wordy, and they don't have to be. It's like you could say it with more simple words, but they just want to put all this flowery language in there. You don't have to do that. I'm here to translate that for you. I'm the illegitimate scholar, and I got perfect training for it because I got certified as a social studies teacher, which was useful in some ways. Because that's what I do when I interview them and when we're doing something like this. Yeah, I'm trying to translate it. I don't always do it perfectly, but thank you for saying that. Let's keep going. Abolish ICE.
for the West to
free Capitol Hill. Oh God, I forgot about this.
Elect suicidal governments, our entire society must be in so much psychological pain as to make suicide seem like the good answer. That's how all suicides happen psychologically.
Right. It's like, it's that, for that to become an option, everything has to be going so poorly for you. And when the rate of unaliving yourself goes up, that means that it's happening more often in the society. So more of that is happening.
If you read suicide notes, the common unifying thread is the word useless, where suicide occurs when people feel as if their lives have no natural meaning and they're not useful or needed by anyone. The absence of silence in our culture has always weirded me out. I was raised a Quaker or a sect of Christians who meditate in silence as a way to reach God. Silence is sacred in Quakerism, and this was an attitude I grew up with. Silence is very important to me, and why I've stopped living in cities. The sacredness of silence is that it gives space for the mind to unwind, in which it can start to introspect. However, our civilization does every single thing it possibly could in order to avoid introspection. We constantly barrage ourselves with hedonism, stimuli, screens, excitement, ideology, buzzwords, amongst other things, in order to avoid ever thinking more deeply. It's even true on a macro level in which our academic, religious, and spiritual institutions avoid thinking about anything deep. You go to church and they don't talk of the spirit of God, rather its outward manifestations. I don't think they often even believe that there's an inner spirit of God. The philosophy our civilization propounds, or postmodernism, openly rejects any meaning or truth in the world. This reconciles our lives to a meaningless hell for our entire civilization. The insane thing is we don't ever talk about this. How come the sexes hate each other? People don't want to have children. Our civilization is committing suicide while people lack any meaning, but the philosophers and greatest minds of our people aren't actively trying to understand and combat this. Even conservatives don't take this seriously at all. In order for our society to survive, we need to take the souls of the people involved seriously. The question is, how do you fix a society dying of a spiritual or psychological plague? Well, the good thing is that I've developed the best answer I can. Part 2. Reprogramming. One of the things which complicates
He wants
this
to
equation is
reprogram
that
us.
human
Sweet.
life doesn't fit into easy boxes. If you were to ask me whether or not you want to heal your soul, or you should target your material life, your religious beliefs, or use a therapist, I would reply with yes. One of the best recent books
Very
on
helpful.
psychology to come out is Lost Connections by Johann Hari. The thesis of the book is that rather than being a chemical imbalance of the brain, depression is caused by your life actually being terrible, stemming either in some part from potential causes.
Yes, I wasn't aware of differences in these rates, but yes, Western civilization is very broad. I generally even include, it depends on the Latin American country. Something like Peru, I probably still Western, but something like Mexico is definitely Western. Calling it not Western is just weird, not even Eurocentric, but like American-centric ideas. It's rooted in Spain like that. And yes, I understand a lot of the people are mestizos, and whether that's ethnically or just the cultural, mestizos being mixed white and Native American. But like the country of Mexico is a Western country in a lot of ways. I'm sure some people here are going to disagree with that, but the structure comes from Spain. It comes from the West.
As being loneliness, poverty, lack of meaning, beauty, and many other things. The fact that this is not completely obvious to our society blows my mind. Of course, someone's psychology is an outgrowth of their environment. This is something Charles Taylor talks about in his book, A Secular Age, which is really about comparing the medieval psychological view of the world to the modern. He said that in the pre-modern world, we viewed psychology as part of a natural ecosystem. A person fills their soul with culture, religion, and spiritual protections against demonic influence or mind viruses. Modernity believes in the buffered personality, or that all humans are rational, independent units which study the world objectively and then make calculated decisions from that. The modern science, as well as the folk wisdom from all of history, completely disagrees. Humans are crazy monkeys who need society and religion to hold them accountable against their own madness. This establishes a major psychological feedback loop in modern thinking, which ultimately dooms it. Since people are innately good and rational, thus the things they think also should be good and rational. This makes it physically impossible to modernity be able to introspect on its own flaws. Carl Jung has spoken a lot about how our own internal mental worlds are reflected out into the outside world. An easy example of this is architecture, where in the same way you can see a little window into someone's soul from the interior decorations they put in their house, you can do so for the type of architecture a civilization builds
Why
with.
is he
If
showing
we are
food?
judging ourselves by our culture,
What?
our
What was
society
that?
is completely suicidal. Our society's
what?
culture
Did I
unironically
miss something?
refuses to not put out content that believes in anything. All the art the mainstream makes looks legitimately demonic now. We've stopped having the ability to make new art, rehashing the intellectual properties of generations ago. Our
Inside
buildings
Out
look
2.
completely soulless
Yeah,
and
okay.
inhuman. There's no place for the human soul anywhere in our
Dude,
society.
I don't know. I'm
This
here
is the
for it, though.
complication. If someone were to ask me, Rudyard, what would we need to pull our civilization
Rudyard? I
back
thought it
from
was Rudyard.
suicide? Is it material or psychological? The short answer, as I said earlier, is yes, in that we have to make material changes to our society so we're less lonely,
knows
poor,
that's not a real
angry, and
answer.
directionless. However, I believe the first step is psychological and philosophical, given if we don't have a direction to aim towards, all the material improvements
Very
we
hard for
attempt
me to
will be
react and
aimless and will
respond.
fail now.
When I have no idea what's going on, and that's kind of where I'm at.
Naturally. This video is not meant to heal our entire civilization. I'm just making a start. And I have this channel. I'll be here. I'm going to keep making videos on this topic to hopefully improve it.
Whatifalthist
And this
is
is
gonna
just the beginning of a
save
series of
Western
videos. However, back to EMDR, we have a series of psychological narratives which we implicitly hold on to, but of which we're often not even aware of. For example, most people with PTSD psychologically blame themselves for trauma that occurred to them. This is since PTSD happens when something traumatic that didn't even exist inside your mental frame occurs. Thus, your body is on alert as a way of trying to guess things that you don't know, which is impossible. The way you heal PTSD is to remove the belief that you are in power of things outside your control.
healing
I can't stress
PTSD now.
enough the point that you don't know who you are.
Oh,
the person you
God.
believe yourself to
Dude.
be is a press agent for your subconscious, whose role is to make you look good to others. Psychological studies have found time and time again where
I
our
don't even know what
minds
to
are
say to that.
terrifyingly good at even deceiving ourselves. The book, The Elephant in the Brain, is incredible at explaining this topic. You are really your underlying assumptions, not the press narrative that you narrate to yourself and others. Lots of people in society today actually do hate themselves, although if you were to ask them, even completely blackout drunk, they would never say so. However, if you were to watch their actions, you would consistently find that they had self-defeating behaviors which overrode the smiley exterior. I think there's just vastly more people than we realize. I worry it's a majority of our current population. Every culture has a mythology, which is really the switchboard from which the society makes decisions. Modernity struggles with understanding mythology, given it's too indirect in that mythology is almost like a video game, which both tells you what the map of the world is and also the best strategies for playing the game.
I don't know
For
why they would
example,
use that
Western
as a
civilization
metaphor.
is pulled from Greek and Nordic mythology alongside the Abrahamic tradition. Over Western history, people have looked back to King Arthur, Solomon, or Achilles.
I want to hear that again.
Indirect in that mythology is almost like a video game, which both tells you what the map of the world is and also the best strategies for playing the game. For example, Western direct in that mythology is almost like a video game, which both tells you what the map of the world is and also the best strategy.
Okay. When he says mythology, like mythology is just stories. And they can be stories that have truth in them or
For
not.
play.
But mythology is not what gives you a roadmap to how to live. What he's referring to here is actually a cosmology. And a cosmology, and this is a cultural anthropology term, it includes mythology, but it also includes other things. And the cosmology is like your entire view of the world, and it includes the mythological stories. It includes like other things in it, other traits and beliefs that lead to a society believing certain things, valuing certain things, and living within a societal cultural system. So that's a cosmology. A mythology it's a story. It's a part of this, but it's a story. It's not it. Maybe it's just not using specific language, but that's fine.
Playing the game. For example, Western civilization is pulled from Greek and Nordic mythology alongside the Abrahamic tradition. Over Western history, people have looked back to King Arthur, Solomon, or Achilles as role models of behavior. When young men died at the Somme, they did so LARPing as Greeks fighting the Persians. Our society has completely restructured our own mythology, mostly around a combination of Marxism, Freudianism, and Hollywood. When we make decisions, we cross-reference it against those. I really can't overstate the importance of Hollywood, which is really the mythological circuit board I see Americans use the most.
So just because, like, obviously, and you'll see us here, right? We have mythology, and honestly, Hollywood is kind of mythology in a way, but those are just the stories. So now it's even more of a point that the mythologies do not create how we live our lives. Like Hollywood movies are not creating how we live our lives. It's part of it, but the culture as a whole has other aspects that feed into this, that feed into what makes up your cosmology, how you view the world. And so, yes, I think Hollywood and the stories that we tell, they do affect how we perceive the world and how we think and everything. But it's just one part of it.
In their value system. This is something that's so deep, I need to make a video just on it. But here's a text wall if you're interested. I've been meaning to make a video, I guess, on Californian civilization, if you want to call it that. But there's been 2 books on that topic I've been postponing reading for a while. The really key problem here is that in our current mythology, we lose by definition. The left very purposely structured our entire worldview to be a spider's web where we lose by structure no matter what we do. An example of that is that in our current social structure, if you're not successful, you're a loser. But if you are successful, you're also bad in the leftist worldview. If you're a white person and you choose to indulge in other cultures, that's racist, being cultural appropriation. And if you don't, that's also racist. Look, if you move to a majority minority area, that's gentrification. And if you move to a majority white area, that's white flight. You can see here that the underlying reality is that our entire worldview was a matrix established in the last last century to actively harm us. Our previous worldview, even though it was flawed, was made mostly by honest people who were compiling millennia of wisdom to try to help others. Meanwhile, the leftist materialist worldview was also made with that intention. However, their definition of helping people was completely destroying civilization. Keep in mind the leftist authors of the mid-20th century all publicly said this stuff. They wrote strategy books saying the purpose of their entire worldview was to weaken the old established order for the revolution through a process of social alienation. Read or listen to Saul Alinsky, Yuri Bezmenov, Gramsci, or even what Marx openly said. These authors openly said that they were trying to destroy religion and community trust, often saying they wanted to have a bureaucrat so that neighbors couldn't talk to each other or friends couldn't make deals and everything had to be structured through a bureaucrat to weaken the society so the communists would win. They said that religion was their greatest enemy and they had to destroy it at all costs. We've been trapped in a spider's web where the left will win the game because they made the game. The more the right wriggles inside the leftist paradigm, the more we lose and get trapped in the web. Religions are a form of hypnotic seduction. I say this since hypnosis is an altered psychological state, which changes how you psychologically perceive the world. You can only be hypnotized if you want to be, and hypnosis therapy is pretty effective at rewiring subconscious assumptions. You can tap into underlying neurological assumptions through hypnosis. Hell, EMDR is a form of hypnosis. Certain priest classes for certain religions are hypnotic worldviews which completely change how you perceive reality itself on any level. It's almost as if religion enters your own eyes, and when you see the world, you see a different universe than someone else. This is where my idea of shattering the glass comes from. I came to realize that the left has developed a mental ecosystem where they win by their own definition. By acknowledging any of the left's underlying realities, we gradually let them hypnotize and seduce us. If you can't win a game, break the game or play a different game. The mind is a living organism, and you need to refuse to take in mental thought viruses that actively harm you. When I say shatter the glass, I mean to completely shatter the old paradigm. I think the old paradigm is wrong on a very deep level, and I wrote 12 different incorrect assumptions which we need to rewire in order for us to survive. I didn't have to be the person who did this, but as my father would say, if no one in the room is doing the right thing, that makes it your duty. To be very clear, if we can't rewire these assumptions, we are completely doomed, since our psychological ecosystem is so biased towards nihilism that any good things will be wasted. I take responsibility for this shattering. If bad things come from this, it's my fault. I did it since it had to be done. These are the 12 underlying assumptions I think we need to alter to survive. Let's go through each. Number 1, we determine reality, changed to we submit to reality. This one should be completely self-explanatory. The most basal level of reality is that you don't get to control the world. We all submit to forces vastly more powerful than us. Even the most powerful people in human history were
whatever that quote he was talking about, we determine reality. I completely read that as your perception of the world determines your reality and how you see things, because everything is like, there's what happens, and then there's your cultural and personal understanding about what that means and like what is happening. It's not like we'll see what he says.
Completely powerless compared to the natural forces which constrain them. This is also the first principle which you need to understand for all the others to make sense. Without reality, there's no way to orient yourself since there's no arbitration method to deal with the world itself. In school, I had to read an article that said if we socialized women, they would be as good basketball players as men. That's insane. We constantly deny reality, whether by ignoring scarcity, genetic, or sexual differences. Our entire paradigm is the denial of reality. Trans is the easiest example.
Okay. That's not what reality is. Like, I get what he's saying. Yeah, that's obviously not true. Like, there are genetic differences between males and females in the human species, just like there are in every single mammals. We're all sexually dimorphic. whatever, man. That's not how I would think about reality, but that's okay.
I hope you can see what the issue here is. The problem is that most people in the West somehow don't believe this. If you studied the
That's not
underlying
true.
philosophic assumptions of our society, they would come across as insane. The left in postmodernism thinks that power relations determine reality. There are other varieties of this with eugenics, tech worship, and market worship. In each case, they think that innovation means humans are no longer beholden to reality. Most people in the West believe some variety of this myth, which ultimately stems from the ancient religion Gnosticism, as I explained in this text wall. Number two,
don't do
nothing is enough to
Your
everything
videos, I
is
guess.
just what it is. I alluded to this before, but we live in the wealthiest, most secure, hygienic, one of the freest and most permissive societies ever. If we were
These are
rational,
all,
we would be
like,
infinitely grateful
opinions
for this. But it's clear that's not the case.
based on
The great
socially
irony is that the
constructed.
best off society ever was also the most dissatisfied ever. As I said before, we're tearing our entire civilization down,
But it's
committing
like,
effective
I get it. By my own definition, yeah, things are really good right now. But that's based on the values that I have culturally as being from this culture. That's not necessarily like a guaranteed thing. But he's talking about that as a reality. But he's the evidence he's using for that being reality is his own culturally and socially determined human created value system that determines what is better. Like that's why this is not reality. It's just it's culturally created. Am I being clear here with culturally related? I've talked about that a lot, but some people might not know what that really means.
suicide due to self-loathing. I'm not saying there aren't problems, but we should at least be grateful for the things our society does. This sort of attitude, first of all,
What
promulgates
practical effect does that
nihilism,
have?
since we never feel satisfied
mean?
with what we accomplish, and thus we don't accomplish anything. This also enables the worst demographic in history, or the most envious and petty. This attitude is also just the most spoiled brat behavior imaginable. The founders of the modern Anglo-American order were some of the most humane, intelligent, enlightened people who have ever lived. And the fact that their main criticism is that they didn't go far enough is a moral sin of the highest level.
How is a Gen Z kid doing the whole millennials don't work hard thing?
Committed by our society. Those who make this criticism are the most entitled people who have ever lived. For example, Europe peacefully gave up on its colonial empires after World War II. This is such a stunningly generous act that it's historically unbelievable. However, the main criticism is that they didn't go further enough, which is legitimately insane. What do these people really want? If they can't answer that question, their life is just wandering through a marsh without a way out. No matter what we accomplished, we're judged by the eye of an impossible utopia. This is the cruelest thing you can do to a person, since it denies their personhood and the validity of their existence. We've gone past the intellectual point where we believe the West is at all psychologically redeemable.
Yeah, I mean, look, decolonization was not some altruistic act. They didn't want to deal with having empires anymore. They weren't profitable. And like it's like, you know, the colonies were created by these nations as protectorates. Like this wasn't like today it's people often talk about these as, you know, exploitative relationships, and to a certain level that's true. But there was also a lot provided by these countries. There were a lot of people there who didn't want decolonization to happen. And depending on the country, it doesn't go so well. And part of that can be blamed on the imperial masters and how they created the system and then abandoned it. And so it could be a negative thing as well. Like, and I know that's kind of an old school idea. It gets into like paternalism of these different countries, but like you created the issue, you created certain problems there, and then you just left. That's not necessarily a good thing. And they're still doing like economic imperialism on these countries that are in their former colonial empires.
Our culture wants to solve this by suicide, which is the most nihilistic and evil way possible. The real answer is that things are just what they are. Everyone has space for improvement, but I don't want to crap on Eritrea for being one of the poorest countries in the world. They have their problems and we have ours. The only way to not go insane is to take and love things for where they're at. Then you're happy when they improve, since it's rare.
Dude,
3. The world is dead to the world is alive. This is one of those things that people assume is an actual philosophic argument, but it's really just a matter of perspective. I just finished reading an interesting book at The Disenchantment of the World by Storm. It argues that everyone who wrote about disenchantment, or the idea that the world is a boring, controlled place without spirits or drama or magic, were people who themselves studied the occult and magic and were trying to seduce the public with their own paradigm, ironically, magically. It's pretty clear the more that you see that the world is a spectacular, beautiful place. We have the Amazon rainforest, Alexander the Great, the city of Istanbul, Komodo dragons, and so many other things.
Komodo. Hey, why are you depressed? You have no chance to buy a house, and you can't have kids because of it, and your culture is materialist, but Komodo dragons exist. What's wrong with you, dude? We have Komodo dragons. You have no chance at a future the way that it's defined by our own culture, but Komodo dragons in Istanbul, which you can't afford to go to because you can't even afford to buy a house. You can barely afford to buy food and a car. But Komodo dragons exist in a place you'll never be able to go to.
American politics today is more interesting than Game of Thrones, while we've made incredibly powerful genies or AIs which give us wisdom. The world we live in is more wonderful than anything that we could possibly imagine. However, we never look at this and pretend the world is a sterile, controlled place. We're living after the end of history. This is a completely arbitrary distinction built off our addiction to power. If the world is a place capable of being controlled and mastered by us, it's dead phenomena. We neurologically completely differently respond to living and dead things. By treating the world as dead, there's nothing worth living for. The reality is the world is not dead mechanistic materia, but is an interactive system we have to actively engage with. This is why hacks for the stock market or dating system don't work long term, since the system is capable of responding to shortcuts. This is why every generation must battle against the world, since the set of our story actively changes before our own eyes, changing as we change it. History isn't even close to over. Life will always be a struggle and adventure. 4. We are soulless blank slates, changed to we all have unique souls. The founding myth of our current civilization is that all humans are interchangeable blank slates, which are completely molded by social engineering. The best example of this is trans, which exists in direct opposition to the most fundamental duality of human nature, that being the masculine and the feminine. We could briefly survive without the nation, class, or religion, but once you mess up biological sex, the human race is extinct. I talk about this theme more so in my video on the anthropology of the left, and that every assumption of our society ultimately leads back to the blank slate as a master key. It also explains why the left has declared war on human life between religion, community, sex.
The left has declared war on human life. No. I mean, I get it. Wow, the squid, dude, that's $20. That's incredible. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, brother. Everyone, please like the video. I appreciate you guys coming and hanging out. Very generous of you, Squid. Thank you so much. This dude almost gets it. He doesn't seem to want to say that we as a society have failed to teach the younger generations how to find purpose and fulfillment, which in turn drove birth rates down and depression up. Yeah, I mean, that is a much better way to say everything that he just said. He's that, and I said that at the very beginning of this, is that Whatifalthist, he has a lot of good takes and a lot of well-researched takes. And he has a lot of bad takes as well, but like he gets it. I think I try to figure it out, right? Because he's clearly a smart guy. I think he's just, I try to understand like where it goes wrong, and it's like you're just trying to make big claims and support them with other claims that you've made. And then it ends up making a tower of sand at a certain point. And I just think, I'll bring my own ideas in a little bit, but even me, the illegitimate scholar, right? Like I root most of what I say in the ideas of people that are like older than me and have a lot of experience on a specific field. Like I still root most of it in that. I think it's a bad idea to get so far away from established ideas into your own ideas, and especially to go far out of established ideas, create your own ideas and then build on those ideas. That's a lot. Like that's something that I don't think you should do a lot. I think it's something that if you're going to do that, it should be in very long form content that's heavily researched, like a book. And you have to really build support for the first idea with a lot of evidence before you even build on that at all. Or and this is just my perception of what his issue is, because I think he does this a lot. But that makes the things you say sound like really crazy. You have to support them and understand them a lot better to do that in a way that people will really get. But yeah, thank you, Squid. $20 is incredibly generous. Thank you so much.
Class, the nation, art, philosophy, and other organic living human cultures. Ending the nation through immigration is blank slate personified. This is pretty ironic given the blank slate has been disproven for over a decade by mountains of scientific evidence and research. Even leftists in the sciences acknowledge that at least half of human behavior on a very anal level.
Yeah, and he's got these big revelations, but a lot of them are what a lot of us, and I know most of my audience is actually older than me. I'll be 30 this month. And like most of us have already had these realizations, but he puts them in videos on his own spin where like, it's not that big of a revelation, but I think his audience is probably younger than mine. So nature versus nurture, right? And what he's saying, I guess, is that the nurture, like leftist culture, is like they say that the nurture is a lot of it. And then, I actually see a lot of people on the right, especially on Twitter, they very much push for nature being like a lot heavier of an input. But I tend to land pretty much in the middle, 50-50, maybe 60-40, 70-30, depending on what it is. 52. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. A lot of people are older. 32, pretty much my age. Good. And 39. Where's everyone from, by the way, in the comments? If you want to share where you're from, obviously you don't have to, but I like doing that every once in a while. Yeah, max break is the highest level. Yeah, let me know where you're from in the comments. I know, from the people I know here, I know we got Americans. We got an Australian in here somewhere. Mexico, AFD 503 is still here. Yeah, let's keep going. Please like the video. Subscribe if you're not. If you want to see more of this stuff, I got a bunch of other stuff on the channel, not just live streams, more edited content, interviews.
With stuff like how fast you drive, your political affiliation, how cilantro tastes, and vacation locations are genetic. Everyone in genetic science at this point knows there are significant genetic differences across race, sex, ethnicity, and class. The question is just how much. This is a video I made which talks about this more. This is a nuclear bomb which will completely destroy the foundations of our society once we realize it. There is freedom here, and that the blank slate ultimately leads to totalitarianism, since once you think human nature is perfectible, it then becomes the responsibility or duty of the ruling class to do so. If we remove the blank slate, we remove their fodder, since giving authority to fallible human nature will obviously backfire. Number 5, everyone is equal to change to some are better than others. Most of these aren't actual arguments, but are basically faith-based claims masquerading as scientific or rational. It's impossible to prove that people are equal, since it's so obviously not true. The only way it makes sense is by taking a blank slatist argument, which we know isn't true. How is Napoleon in any way equal to the rapper Lil Xanax? The story of human history is the story of inequality, for better or for worse. Hell, capitalism's enormous success. You're
Bavarian, dude. I didn't even know you were German. Dude, okay. Sorry to interrupt this with this, but I love Bavaria. It's I would love to visit Bavaria. I was supposed to go to Bavaria. I think Frankfurt was where we were going to go. I was going to going to Kurultaj, which is it's the meeting of the tribes. Is it translated in Hungary a few years ago? But our flights got canceled. It was like really weird flights in Europe that year. But yeah, Bavaria is one of my favorite places in the world. And one of my buddies is Bavarian on Twitter. He's a history guy too. Oh gosh, I'm forgetting his name right now. If I remember, I'll say it. I'm gonna keep with the video.
Suggests that the most powerful force in human nature is the unequal pursuit for status. The idea of equality sounds nice on paper, but in reality has disastrous consequences. Something pre-industrial authors reaching back to the Greeks were very aware of. The thing the founding fathers were most worried about with the rise of the new American Republic was ideas of equality, enabling envy, and mob rule. This was since they had studied the parallels to Greco-Roman civilization earlier, where their failed democracies occurred for that reason. The founding fathers were able to predict socialism a century in advance due to said ancient parallels. What equality ultimately aims at is the tearing down of the great, since that's the easiest thing to do, rather than increasing the lows to higher levels. When you see a government championing equality, what you really see is the elite allying with the mob against the vigorous, given it's in the shared self-interest due to self-preservation for the elite and envy from the mob. This is what killed Europe as it elected socialist governments in the early 20th century, which destroyed Europe's global competitivity for the century after. Keep in mind, this was after 500 years where Europe completely dominated the world in any single trade. This is a tale.
That was a long time ago. That was, yeah, like 2010 is what Emmanuel was saying. No, this was like 2022, I think.
As old as time, seen, as said before, in the classical era, medieval Asia, Latin America, or with modern wokeness, as I explained in this text wall. This is not to say equality is useless. Inequality or the way after century, which destroyed Europe's global competitivity for the century after. Keep in mind, this was after 500 years where Europe completely dominated the world in any single trade. This is a tale as old as time, seen, as said before, in the classical era, medieval Asia, Latin America, or with modern.
Thank you for saying Nevada correctly. It's Nevada? Nevada? Nevada. What did I say the first time? I don't even remember. You can take the money back if I said it wrong the second time. Thank you very much for the donation. I appreciate it. Nevada. Nevada. Fuck. Now I don't know.
Modern wokeness, as I explained in this text wall. This is not to say equality is useless. Inequality can have equally negative effects, which I explained in this text wall. Like men and women, or employers and employees, these two principles exist in critical tension where you need to enable their strengths, but not activate their equality and equity. Cooperation. Latin America is an example of both elitism and communism failing, while capitalism does a good job of coordinating through consensual cooperation. Number 6, the downtrodden are morally good, changed to success and morality are completely different axes. This is an idea that stems success and morality. The downtrodden are morally good, changed to success and morality are completely different axes. This is an idea that stems indirectly from equality. Basically, in order to have the idea of equality to psychologically balance out, you have to make the lessers morally superior and the inferior superior. Allying the have-nots is also just the left's evolutionary strategy to get power. What I'd say is that all of these theories immediately fall apart under pressure. An example is I feel comfortable saying America is morally superior to the Taliban, even if we have issues. Most countries in the Middle East would rather be conquered by America than the Taliban, even if the Taliban are culturally and religiously closer to them. I don't think there's much of a relationship between status and morality. I think the higher status tend to be more competent in general as an
Emmanuel, very, very good point. He doesn't get that his own ideas are modernist. That is what like I totally think. He's putting too much weight in what are his culturally informed beliefs on like what is good and everything. While trying to criticize the same things that he's kind of like the ideas that he's pushing himself. Yes, in medieval times, your role was largely determined in the feudal network of oaths. Yes, exactly. And we were talking earlier about how that worked in China, which, didn't have a feudal system as it said, but Confucianism is a system of reciprocity. The feudal system is also a system of reciprocity. So, like, in Europe, where you have reciprocity, as you have, like, a free man who's or a serf or something who's working for a knight or a lord, and there is a reciprocal relationship there where the knight provides certain things, the lord provides certain things, and the subject provides other things, and then that lord, maybe depending on what country you're in, it goes up to like a duke or a count or something, or not a duke, but a baron or a count, something like that, and then up to a duke, and then up to a king or something. Or it, like, you go all the way to the duke. The Duke of Normandy he wears the sword of the King of France. The King of France gives him a sword. It's a reciprocal relationship where they're a vassal of them, and there's this whole network of higher people, lesser people, vassals, and lower vassals, and lords, and all this stuff, and it's reciprocal relationships.
An imperfect rule, since they
Patronage
needed
system.
competence either to achieve or maintain dominance. A lot of this is just completely dependent on context, in which certain ecosystems reward good behavior to rise in status, like democracies, while others, like police states, actively reward negative behaviors.
Well, everything I just said is in theory. It's like there's supposed to be a reciprocal relationship. That doesn't mean that it's not always honored. I'm not saying that the knights were like honorable. I'm saying that was the theoretical system and how it functioned in practicality. Not that they were getting, not that they were always treated super well.
Just want to completely remove the discussion of morality from the discussion of greatness, as Nietzsche wanted to in the 19th century. Were the Romans the good or the bad guys? That depends on who you ask, but either way, everyone can agree that the Romans were excellent and incredible. Same thing with most empires or most things. Growing up, my father would say, don't go around the world looking for good or bad guys, since there often isn't a line, and there's often not a good guy. Number 7, progress is innate to we make progress happen. This one is an outgrowth of the idea that we've innately mastered the world, turning it into dead phenomena which we can manipulate. This idea stems from Hegel's idea of the dialectic, which in turn stems from the stunning technological, political, social, economic advances seen in Western civilization over the last 1,000 years since the Crusades. I can see on an emotional basis why that would color someone's vision with the idea that progress is innate. We take progress so for granted that we assume a new change must be good or progress. However, this is one of those fish in a pond moments in which, if you look at any other data set, this is clearly not the case. We are clearly the exception, partly due to various good luck on Europe's part.
What is he talking? Progress itself is like, what is determined to be progress? Like, change is innate. Change happens. Culture is dynamic, which means it's always changing. But progress implies a positive change, and that requires a value system that determines what is good and what is positive and what is negative.
Culturally or geographically, as well as the West having the most advanced concept of human nature, thus creating incredibly effective institutions. If you look at every other civilization ever, you have great leader creates empire, said empire decays, and then the barbarians burn everything down, then restart ad nauseum. This is how the Chinese, Indians, native Mexicans, Arabs, Babylonians, and even the Greeks or Romans saw time as cyclical. The reality is that history is more so like a double helix, which is a very constant theme in mysticism around the world.
He's attacking the idea that time is cyclical.
It can appear either like a spiral or a line going up, depending on how you look. This explains all the historic narratives in which, yes, there are repeated cycles in history, while at the same time, the total game does change. The thing is, the game does grow bigger and better, which is why the world is 8 times the population it did 200 years ago. As the game does get bigger and more complex, individual human lives get better in the course of a single lifetime.
Again, better is determined by a value system. Progress for the sake of progress is not good. Yeah.
but get pushed back into hardship, since suffering is required for the impetus for continued progress. This suggests to me that the meaning of life, in some ways, is structured on an individual level, in which you will be offered challenges that you have to take on as an individual in your generation, and your children have to continue with free will to make the decision to either take or leave responsibility for the situation. A great irony, and this is seen in psychological studies of narcissism, is that while we suffer from tremendous self-loathing, due to our ideas of progress, we are also absurdly arrogant, given we think we're so much more vastly superior to the rest of history that we're not comparable at all. Self-loathing and arrogance are two sides of the same coin in a manner dignity and humility are. However, this is not a good combination for us. 8. Everything is material to we must accept natural law. This is again something that's basically a cyclical argument. Empiricism is the idea that we measure things that we can physically see. I would say that I'm an empiricist in most ways, even though I have several non-empirical tendencies. I try to use an empirical analysis of history and seeing what does and doesn't work without getting stuck
what does
in
and doesn't work.
theories where your own sense of the world is controlled by the theory itself. However, one of the points we don't get in empiricism is that spiritual phenomena are some kind of empirical experience. We have billions of records of people having spiritual experiences, enough that every major civilization has been built off religion. If you really study the world empirically, you find that humans have lots of conscious experiences like drama, religion, philosophy, tradition, and other things, which are ideal things that don't exist in the physical world, but matter completely. Whether a nation can fulfill the abstract moral concept of justice determines almost every part of its society. Same thing with any moral concept of how
when you look for a mate, you're not looking. Why would he say mate? I guess he's talking about like reproduction, but you're not looking for an exact person. You look for a person who can fill abstract archetypal traits. The person who best fulfills the archetype wins, and he just shows 3 hot women. All right. Cool.
Material matter must
I mean, 2 hot women, and I'm not saying she's not attractive, but I don't know. She looks younger.
Dualistic mating. The laws of the universe which reward and punish us, which you see consistently across history. And depending on how you want to frame things, you can either call the will of God or the laws of physics. The societies which follow natural law, such as maintaining freedom, honor, toughness, and inventiveness, beat those that don't. You can push this thesis to differing degrees, but it's clear the universe has abstract principles which don't exist on a material plane of existence. It's clear not all of reality is material, given through studying physics, we've consistently found that atom-to-atom movement has been incapable of predicting outcomes. And when we look at human psychology, we find religion, another non-material thing, is incredibly important. The pure materialist argument stems from us only looking at replicable phenomena. This is useful for law and manufacturing, but the actual human experience has too many things that aren't replicable. Emotions, religion, passion, love are things we can't leave out of our paradigm. Imagine if we could never see true love or love inside the lab, and thus we said it never existed. This distinction is probably the best argument for the separation of church and state. 9. There are easy answers changed to life is innately mysterious. When people ask me, Rudyard, how did the Roman Empire fall? I like to jokingly say, depends on what your agenda wants it to be. I've seen convincing arguments that the Roman Empire fell due to moral degeneracy, population decline, changes in military structure, the rise of Christianity, elite issues, civilizational life cycles, and climate change. Normally, people pick whatever their current agenda is. I'm self-aware I do this in that I blame the exact same things that are killing our society today, such as moral degeneracy and population decline. I know that I'm doing it, And yet I still do it since I don't have a better answer yet. Human nature is funny. When you look over history, you find dozens of brilliant philosophers who claim to have found revolutionary total truths. Plato, Confucius, Jesus, Muhammad, Marx, Rousseau, in that their ideas negated the ideas of other philosophers. However, were any of these figures proved really right or wrong?
Ooh.
Of course, some ideas innately are more accurate at describing the world than others, which is why we can see by certain political philosophies working vastly better than others. But the water can get pretty murky. For example, Marx is an example of a philosopher who got things really wrong. The philosophy he developed killed downwards of 100 million people with a retarded philosophy.
Dude, look, whatever you want to say about Marx, like Marx didn't say to do the things that Stalinist Russia said. He made criticisms about capitalism. He didn't really argue for specific things. So like you coming at it and saying that it's generally a bad thing, I don't know. I mean, like, you have to establish what's bad and what's good. From my American perspective, yeah, I think it's bad. But I know that that's my personal perspective, which is created by the values that I have within my culture. Like, how does he not get that?
Completely disconnected from nature. However, when he said, due to the psychological alienation of capitalism, socialism was doomed to dominate the next 200 years as a lesson in world history before something else, that was brilliant. Even the figures who we would worship, like Christ or Aristotle, are still controversial figures, which very smart philosophers have denounced. No deep questions about life can really be answered. We can make a narrative to explain it to us, but it's completely unclear if that narrative is actually the fundamentally correct universal narrative. We're not even clear how much of correct universal narratives there are in life. So we don't even know how to answer that question. We can just do what we have to do in this situation to get things to work. What's the purpose of life? How should we be happy? Are men or women better than the other? Why did France lose out to Britain in the 19th century? For each of these, you're wrestling with a living, dynamic idea.
Do I believe in objective morality? I think I have to. Yes and no, but like I feel like it's better for it to be yes. I don't know. It's a tough question. It's a good question. I lean towards yes.
And you can get a pretty good answer, but there are no easy answers, only differingly imperfect ones, which we have to make trade-offs for which is better. 10, life has no meaning to we die without meaning. Our current society completely rejects meaning. We never talk about it and basically socially outcast or reject anyone who tries to talk about it. Our elite openly champions nihilism. We never really have serious conversations about what we actually want out of life. And postmodernism is literally a philosophy built off the rejection of meaning. It hates those who have opposing grand narratives to nihilism. The irony is that we've consistently found through saw or studies in ancient wisdom that wealth isn't the most important thing for happiness by a long shot, and values or community are the most important variable. This means that the breakdown of both are basically dooming factors for society. They're not side dishes, but the main course. For whatever reason, we need meaning to survive. I think this is more so a male trait, but I believe is still universally human. We literally die without meaning, and the societies that lose said meaning always collapse. This is just a fundamental reality of the world, and it's completely obvious that the removal of meaning has been negative to our societies. The greatest issue I believe Gen Z fails besides loneliness is existential nihilism. When we die, the thing we think about is, did we fulfill our meaning or our relationships? Not that we got rich or where we went on vacation. 11, we are rationally disconnected from the world to our minds are molded by our surroundings. One of the things I find stunningly ridiculous is that for decades, our society believed that depression was caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, not stuff in the person's life. This is one of those things that's technically true in framing, but is completely ridiculous if you analyze it holistically. The thing is that the chemical imbalance is caused caused by your life being terrible. As we
great,
spoke
cool.
about earlier, Johan Hari's book Lost Connections covers this really well. The idea that people would just magically have depression with no external environmental conditions starting it is just insane in retrospect. Alternately, the idea that you can completely separate someone from their ecosystem. Gen Z is in a worse economy, dating situation, political climate, they have crippling loneliness, meaning issues, and when they fail or get depressed, it's still their fault. They're being judged by a boomer standard to which they have nothing in common with. People are completely separated from their context, even though in reality, context determines nearly literally everything. We do a lot of other insanities due to this idea, which Charles Taylor calls the buffered personality. In medieval philosophy, our minds were seen as living organisms you should put good bacteria into in order to protect it against mind viruses. The Catholic Church was seen as a spiritual antibody protecting against demonic possession. The world was innately seen as a psychic, spiritual ideal place, since all things had spiritual charge that you had to relate through ceremony and tradition. We can see the inverse of this attitude today, in which all mental health issues need to be solved by therapy or rationally changing your own mind. The reality is people aren't rational, and religion or community are the things which do the best job at keeping people psychologically stable. We would never think this, since we never think of the human character of society, instead seeing us as a bunch of cogs. 12. Self-loathing is a virtue. Change to self-loathing is as bad as hubris. In my opinion, this is the most cancerous and satanic thing our society does, which I can't get past. In our culture, the more you loathe yourself, the more moral a person you are. White or Western majority things which don't actively self-flagellate get torn down. The West is committing civilizational in real time. Even the most basic parts of our identity, between aesthetic, food, housing, school, and anything else, are being ripped up. There's some idea that this helps the downtrodden, but why? Making the rich hate themselves doesn't help the poor. In fact, it makes them worse off, since the rich and poor are actually dependent on the others for society to work. The rich and poor need to be good at their social station for everyone to benefit. If white America falls apart, black America will be hurt more than the whites would be. I remember growing up, I learned to tear myself down in conversations, to not aspire to things or try to realize my full potential, since in school or in the culture, any sign of ambition or dedication was treated as elitism and arrogance. Even to try to be more moral, smart, or successful is elitist in their worldview. This is a worldview which is dragging us all down to hell in real time. This nihilism is the most evil thing in history. I hold it as worse than even the bloodthirsty humanist utopianism in the last century, since even they liked growth in human life itself. What can I say about a movement that thinks having children is morally wrong and being a man makes you born into sin?
Lot, but that's
final. I hope you can see that this is
those are not like massive ideas. They're just not. 25% is a lot, but it's not enough for me to say, oh, this generation thinks that. It's not more than half.
Why we need to shatter the glass. I hope you can see how our society is being eaten alive by active evil. Once you see these things, you realize the hour is late and things are very, very urgent. When we see the issues in society today, they're the very tip of a very, very deep iceberg of social rot caused by pure nihilism. A society can't believe the things we do and succeed or be happy, or even fail honorably. These things are so cancerous, we need to investigate and uproot them now. If we don't solve this now, this is only the beginning of something truly evil and dark. This level of nihilism, if allowed to percolate, will transform us into something truly evil, disgusting, and vast. Our people and our souls are at stake here. Everything we love is at stake. You could say I'm fear-mongering, but I believe all of this with complete sincerity. For the love of God and with all the power invested in me by myself, I will shatter this glass. I hope that what comes out of this, if anything, is better than what we have now. Peace.
Welcome, ladies.
Spiffing Brett. Great channel. Yeah, I don't. Dude, I mean, that was weird. That was weird. Any questions? Anybody have any questions for me? Something I missed that somebody asked? My battery died. 1 second. I'm gonna put it back in. I'll stay on and talk for a minute if people have any questions or anything. Just gonna replace this battery. Oops. Replace the battery. Yeah, he is so close yet so far. Geez, yeah, I don't know what to make of all that, man. I think the first one was better. It was just a lot. It was just a lot of ideas, a lot of ideas. Give him another 20 years. Yeah. I think he's been stunted, unfortunately, just by getting popular so quickly. I don't know how an 18-year-old can deal with that. Without, getting a little too big for his britches, I guess, or something. However you want to say it. Probably shouldn't use American idioms like that when half the audience is not American. But like, you guys know what I mean by too big for his britches? Does that translate to the Germans and the Mexicans and my Turkish friend Ermish isn't here right now, but yeah. So I'm not gonna do any more. I'm just probably gonna hop off here if nobody's got any questions, and I will be back soon. I'm gonna edit that episode tomorrow. Anything? I'll give a minute in case someone's typing. Like the video, please. Subscribe if you're not. Patreon's right below. It's $2 a month. Early and unedited episodes of the podcast. There's not so much on there. I want to do more with it. I don't have great ideas, but it's $2 a month at the lowest. So, it wouldn't have done it better than him at 18. Honestly, I'd very possibly have done much worse. Oh, you wouldn't have done better. Yeah. Yeah, probably me too. Great to not miss your stream for once. Well, glad to have you here live. Streamlabs setup. What's Streamlabs? I use StreamYard. I don't know if that's what you're talking about. Yeah, I wouldn't want to get big that early. I didn't start making stuff till I was like 27, 28. I had some pretty good Xbox Live rants at 18, but they would have immediately been censored for content. Damn. Me and Dedunking Dan were talking about we were talking about old like internet trash talk. It used to be the best, man. Oh, no, I don't know what Streamlabs is for getting donations. I think I've heard of the company. I don't think I have a good view of the company. As an American, where do you think he deviates from the common America MAGA person with a relatively intellectual sensibility? Where would I put him in that category? He's a lot more philosophical. And I don't mean that in like a positive way. Or a negative way, just like, he gets more into these ideas than most people, but with his general ideas, which I tend to agree with about like, destruction of society and stuff, and a lot of these things not being good on social issues like blank slate. I mean, he's right there with MAGA, and so am I, even though I did vote for Trump this time, but I wouldn't call myself like a MAGA person. But I would say he cares a lot more about like the intricacies of this stuff than most people. And I would say that's the big difference. I think the general MAGA person is not as interested in the more material things like he is. And like, they're more interested in the more traditional, like more traditional to like American conservatism of being like Reaganomics, essentially. I think the regular MAGA people are a lot more like that, but they differ from the regular, like neoconservatives, in that they're a little bit more populist. They're a little bit more left for economics than a normal conservative, like a George Bush, a Dick Cheney type conservative, or even like a Mitt Romney. He has gotten noticeably more spiritual. Yeah, he has. And that is not a thing that you generally see with MAGA people, besides just general Christian religion. Most MAGA people are Protestants. Most white people in America are Protestants. Well, most white and black people in America are Protestants, and a lot of the other races as well. But that's like I'm Irish Catholic. The That's a minority in America, or any type of Catholic. It's like, for ethnic groups, it's generally like the South is mostly Protestant. It's mostly Baptist. Southern New England, where I live, because of Italian and Irish migration, and only Irish Catholic migration, is Catholic. And there are a few other pockets of Catholics, especially in the Southwest, largely Mexican and Hispanic. And then most of the rest of the country is Protestant, with the exception of Utah, which is Mormon. Yeah. Yeah. And he's a Protestant. He's Quaker. Yeah, the Quakers are a religious group, ostensibly Christian, that are traditionally in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania used to be like a Quaker state. So he's like a neocon from the Bush era, just born too late. No, I wouldn't say so. He's too like spiritual, and he's not like war hockey, and if he's not that worried, like that era of conservative was very much like pro immigration, pro NAFTA. Like that would be a big difference between somebody who is a Bush era conservative neocon type thing versus a MAGA person, is that the Bush era people would be very much in favor of something like NAFTA because of the economic growth for it, whereas a MAGA person is likely going to be against NAFTA. NAFTA being, and I'm using this as a stand-in, there's other policies like this, but NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Association, or Act, that allows like free trade with Mexico and Canada, but Mexico is more relevant for manufacturing goods coming in. They're much more Reagan-like in their economics. Anti-immigration William F. Buckley, in a good way. Yeah. I don't actually know who Buckley is. By my parents' generation, we lost our religion. Close call. Yeah, my parents are not very religious. If you combine believing in modernism, classical liberalism, meritocracy, anti-immigration, anti-socialism, mourning the European empire, so he's basically like an average European alt-right politician. Yeah, also anti-war. Yes, I am also believing, I wouldn't say I believe in modernism. I would say classical liberalism is kind of a joke to me, but a lot of the things of it I believe in. Anti-socialism and anti-immigration, I'm those things. Although it depends on what definition people are using for socialism. Because when I think of socialism, I think of what's essentially communism, which is like what the original definition of socialism is. But socialists today tend to just, at least in America, it's different than in Europe, but in America, socialists tend to just be democratic socialists. They tend to just be liberals who are calling themselves socialists. It's really weird. I'm not for that, but I am more left economically. I'm definitely not a communist or what I would define as a socialist, but I do think that I do think that more inequality is not really a good thing. More inequality, like essentially that comes down, like a strong middle class is when America was at its best, and having more people that consume more is better for the broad. And when I say consume more, I don't mean with like credit cards, but I mean like people having income to put into the market economy, which makes the economy keep growing. Whereas what we have now is a lot of rich people are more rich than they ever have been, huge inequality. And this creates a situation where you have, let me gather my thoughts for a moment. When you have this level of inequality, and you have so much more money going to the upper class who don't spend their money back into the economy, but they use it to buy assets. They use it to buy things that make them money. They buy businesses in the form of buying them outright or buying stock in businesses. They control things that make money, what a communist would call the means of production. And that means less money goes into the people that circulated in the economy. People have less money, and then the price of those assets to make more money continues to rise. And in a market-based economy, that slows down the velocity of money. It slows down the amount of money being spent. It's really, really not good. And I would call myself a capitalist, but at the same time, the type of capitalism that we have today is not really capitalism. It's distorted in a lot of ways from what it originally was. I mean, what we have today, Adam Smith would have been disgusted by. What do I think about distributivism? I don't know enough about it to give an opinion on it. Christian corporatism as alternatives to capitalism, socialism. I don't know. Christian corporatism? What is that? I think that the advent of the corporation, which I think originally comes from the Dutch, is generally a good thing. Today, it's very not good, as they have a lot of rent-seeking behavior, which changes. It changes the world in a lot of ways. It changes how we interact with it. They're able to change laws. They're able to change laws and culture with the amount of power and influence that they have, and that is bad. But what's good about corporations is that people are incentivized to create businesses because it limits their own personal liability in it, and it allows people to take risks and grow things. And I think that's a good thing. But now they're not great. Also, multinational corporations that are distinct and they're away from, their incentives are not aligned with the country that they're from. That's a very bad thing, because if you have corporations who are aligned with an international order rather than the country that they're located in, their incentives, they're not concerned with the country succeeding, because traditionally a corporation that's from a country would be incentivized to assist that country because they're screwed if the country is screwed. But now that's not true. And that practically means that the corporations as an entity, they don't really care what happens to the country. They'll do things that harm the country. It doesn't matter to them. A system of social organization that has at its base the grouping of men according to the community of their natural interests and social functions, and as true and proper organs of the state, they direct and coordinate labor and capital in matters of common interest. I mean, so I like the idea in theory. I would have to know more about it, but like that's theoretical, right? But it sounds a lot like trade unionism almost. It's like, but at the same time, what I really like about that is an emphasis on localism. I think that what happens in Germany as well as the United States are they're both federalized systems, and I think that there's a lot of good things about a federal system. I think Canada would also be a federal system with their provinces, and also Mexico. But it's like you have the federal government, which is the top level government. You have state governments. And you have then in the United States, at least, you have county and local governments. And that level of having governments means that, there's people at every level to make decisions. And I think that getting more decisions down as local as possible is the best thing, because when you get down to the local problems that people have, the people are closest to the problems that they need to solve. They're most specific. So when that happens, you're able to solve the issues the best, and the solutions apply to you the most. Whereas now it seems like power is flowing up more to the states, and even more so to the federal level, at least in the United States. And then the locales, they don't have as much power as they used to. So you're not able to solve your issues at a local level if that power is taken by the higher forms of the federalized government. Arrived late. I think he has good principles, but lacks experience to give it a better context. Yeah. And most of the cultural bastions are of Spanish origin. You mean, you must be listening to the part where I was talking about Mexico and how it's a Western country. Yeah. All right. I think I'm going to end it here, guys. Thanks so much for joining me. Catch me on Twitter, Patreon, all these things. Yeah, Patreon's $2 a month, early and unedited episodes to support me. Find me on Twitter, too. I write a lot of stuff on Twitter. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Talk to you later.